If only we had realized sooner. If only we had been stronger. This wouldn't have happened. These thoughts echoed relentlessly in Valyr's mind as he drifted through the void of space, watching the remnants of Earth dissolve into nothing. The world he had called home, the world he fought to protect, gone. And the cause? A game. A game none of them had chosen, yet all were forced to play. Valyr retraced the steps that led to this devastation. They had prepared. They had planned. They had trained for every conceivable scenario. With the enemy laid bare, their strategies refined, they were confident. There was a saying, know the enemy, and you win half the battle. But reality had spit in the face of their efforts. Against all odds, they lost. Valyr had been on the front lines when it happened. He had watched their forces fall, one by one, hope bleeding from their eyes as the enemy crushed them. The despair was overwhelming, inescapable. No preparation had been enough. No strength had been sufficient. They were simply outmatched. Floating in silence, his body disintegrating into the cold vacuum, Valyr closed his eyes and made a final plea. If there's anyone, anything, up there, give me another shot. No, not just another shot. A second chance. A chance to make it right. Let me fix my mistakes. Please. As he finished the words, his body slipped further from reality. The freezing embrace of space devoured him, and with it his consciousness began to fade. Then light, brilliant, blinding, warm. Valyr's eyes snapped open. A blue sky stretched above him, its clouds drifting lazily. He was no longer surrounded by the cold, lifeless void. Instead, something prickly pressed against his back. Confused, he sat up, brushing strands of straw from his arms. His limbs moved. His body responded. Was this the afterlife? But this didn't feel like the end. It felt like a beginning. Around him, there were no skyscrapers or machines. No ruins of Earth. Only rolling plains, distant rock formations, and forests brimming with life. Birds chirped somewhere nearby. He was lying atop a cart loaded with hay, pulled by a wooden carriage. Did the heavens only grant half my wish? He muttered. Maybe this is their way of telling me to slow down and enjoy life. Ding! A chime suddenly rang through the air. Valyr's eyes widened. Ding! The sound came again, this time accompanied by something impossible. A translucent screen materialized in front of him. Valyr blinked in disbelief, then leaned forward, reading the glowing text. Initializing non-player character advancement system. Adapting to variant GB. Identity confirmed. Valyr Zeihardt. System integration complete. Access granted. He stared, then smiled, then laughed, giddy, breathless, tearful laughter. His fists trembled, then rose to the sky. They really listened. The heavens actually listened. This was no dream. This was his second chance. Wiping his tears, Valyr calmed himself and examined his surroundings more carefully. The cart continued forward, the road beneath it bumpy and narrow. He strained his memory. Everything from his past life was still intact. He could remember it all. The game's map, events, characters, even specific quests. I must be near the north side of Velio's plains, he murmured, glancing at the terrain. And, judging by this road, we're approaching a village. Curious, he climbed to the front of the cart. A young man sat at the reins, gently guiding a well-fed horse. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost surreal. It finally dawned on him. I've been reborn inside the game as an NPC. A chuckle escaped his lips, and that might just be the best thing that could have happened. Lying back in the hay, Valyr let the breeze brush over his face. A grin spread across his features as he stared up at the sky, feeling for the first time not dread, but determination. Because in the early stages, an NPC knows far more than a player ever could. It had been about an hour since Valyr came to grips with the truth. He had reincarnated into Greater Beyond, the very game that had led to humanity's downfall. Not as a player this time, but as one of the countless NPCs that populated its vast, intricate world. Realizing the gravity of his situation and the rare opportunity it presented, Valyr decided to strike up conversation with the man driving the carriage he'd awoken in. Over the hour, their chatter turned light, even friendly. We've talked about a lot already, the man said, chuckling as he slung an arm around Valor's shoulder, but I still don't know your name. It's Valyr, he replied with a faint smile. How about you, sir? What should I call you? Sir, the man laughed awkwardly. You're making me feel old. Just call me Trindal. And honestly, I'm glad for the company on this boring road. I'm glad I'm not a burden then. Valyr nodded before his expression turned thoughtful. There's something that's been bugging me, though. If it's not about money, I'm all ears, Trindal quipped with a grin. What's on your mind? Well, Valyr hesitated, looking at the older man. Don't you think it's weird for someone to just wake up on a carriage with no memory of getting on it? Trindal shrugged. Weird, sure, but you didn't just appear. You gave me some coin a couple of nights ago and asked for a ride. Looked like you had somewhere to be, and I had room, so I let you on. I did. Valyr blinked. Yeah, you were completely out cold the moment I said yes. Not gonna lie, for a minute I thought I was hauling a corpse, Trindal said with a chuckle. Valyr fell silent, thoughts swirling. He searched his fragmented memories, trying to make sense of what had happened prior to his awakening. There wasn't anything extraordinary about his first name, but when he thought of the surname, Zeihardt, the name sparked something distant and vague, important maybe, but now wasn't the time to dwell on it. Instead, he continued chatting with Trindal, easing further into this new reality. After a while, he offered to take over the reins so Trindal could get some rest. The older man gratefully accepted, giving Valyr a quick rundown of how to handle the horse and rode before climbing into the back to nap. Now alone up front, Valyr let the reins rest loosely in his hands as he stared out at the open road, a strange mixture of nostalgia and anticipation settling in his chest. I still can't believe I've reincarnated directly into Greater Beyond as an NPC, no less. The very game that had consumed Earth in his past life. Greater Beyond was more than a virtual world. It had become a global obsession. The first and only true immersion Vermork. It had once united every person on the planet in a shared experience. But that unity came with a cost. The developers had used that connection to seize control, blurring the line between player and puppet. As the truth spread, opposition had formed, Valyr included. He had joined a resistance to fight for freedom, to prevent the game from becoming the only reality. But they lost. Now, he'd been given a second shot. This time, he vowed, we'll be ready before the final battle begins. Trindal had mentioned their destination earlier, a Eardo village. Not ideal, Valyr thought. He would have preferred a town or city to kick off his progress. But still, as far as starter locations went, it wasn't bad. In fact, he mused aloud, starting in a village might be the safer option, especially since I know more about this world than any average player. His thoughts drifted to the planet he was on, Veldener. He felt lucky. The human race had two starting planets in the early versions of the game. Asgare's, a realm saturated with raw, chaotic magic, and Veldener, a more grounded world steeped in medieval fantasy. A Eardo village, he recalled. A basic spawn point for new players, designed to help them acclimate before they branched out into the wider world. System, he said calmly, testing the waters. Show me my stat screen. A familiar ding rang out. Valyr Zeihardt. Class, civilian, rank 0. Species, human. Level 1. Power level, 9C. HP, 10 out of 10. MP, 10 out of 10. Stats, VIT1, STR1, AGI1, DX1, INT1, WS1, PR1, LUK1. Unassigned points, 1. Remarks, nothing stands out. Incredibly normal. Near the bottom of the screen, a blinking line of text caught his eye. Version 0.1b of Greater Beyond starts in 60 days. Valyr's eyes widened. 0.1b? Wait, that's the closed beta version. He racked his brain. The closed beta had only been available to a handful of people and had generated insane hype. By the time the public version dropped, the game had sold out everywhere. Valyr had even bought his own copy from Scalper. Back then, they just introduced time dilation tech. So this 60-day countdown probably only applies to NPCs like me, he muttered. Based on the original settings, The time ratio between the real world and the game was about 1 week in-game for 1 day in real life. That means a few dozen players will be logging in within the next week or so. A slow smile spread across his face. If I play this right, I might be able to gain a serious head start before the beta even begins. Closing the status screen, Valyr adjusted the reins and leaned back slightly, letting the wind brush his face. This time, he thought we won't lose.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Although Valyr was the one driving the carriage, causing a bit of unease in Trindle as he tried to rest, not much happened during the rest of their journey, only having to stop at some point as the sun had set. As they had set up camp for the night, near the road they were traveling on, the two of them continued to talk for a bit more, with Valyr doing more asking rather than talking. Nevertheless, Trindle did not mind the small interrogation they had, instead finding it refreshing as he had been traveling alone for quite some time. With all of Valyr's questions answered, as well as Trindle's boredom appeased, they eventually ate their dinner and fell asleep, knowing that a long day awaited them once they woke up. Fortunately, the weather was quite pleasant by the time they had woken up, prompting them to return on their journey without much problems. Unsurprisingly, Trindle took over the reins and drove the carriage to its final destination. However, Valyr was there by his side, allowing them to idly converse as their destination gradually got nearer and nearer. Eventually, once the sun seemed to be an hour away from reaching its zenith, the two were greeted by the sight of tall stone walls from a few kilometers away, enveloping what seemed to be a small yet lively settlement. Noticing this, Valyr turned to look at Trindle, who looked back at him before lightly nodding. If you're thinking what I'm thinking, then yeah, that's the place, all right. Up ahead, Eardo village. With a grin, Trindle used the reins to give the horse pulling their carriage a signal, notifying the latter to hasten its pace. In response, as if it had been waiting for this moment all this time, the horse hastily sped up as it made the carriage slightly shake, wanting nothing more than to end the journey once and for all. With that, their carriage had traveled the remaining distance within a matter of minutes, prompting Trindle to pull on the reins once they were around 100 meters away from the village gates. Sensing something pulling on its mouth, the horse slowed down as fast as it had sped up, reducing their speed to a trotting pace as the carriage entered Eardo village without much problems. While they were gradually making their way deeper into the village, Valyr looked around, finding it somewhat nostalgic to be in a starter village once again. Of course, unlike last time, I'm now an NPC, not a player. Then again, that change did not stop him from admiring the sights that the humble village offered, showing him a lively settlement that seemed to be self-sufficient. Most of the buildings within his field of vision were made out of roughly cut stone, with roofs made out of thatched wood. And, as far as his eyes could see, the village seemed to only span a kilometer in diameter. Nevertheless, a light smile gradually crept up on his face, prompting Trindle, who glanced at Valyr for a bit, to lightly smile as well. Unfortunately, all good things had to come to an end, with the carriage stopping in front of what looked like a 3-story building made out of chiseled stone. Realizing what was happening, Valyr looked at Trindle before nodding, getting off the carriage to allow the latter to do what he had to do. As Trindle got off the carriage to haul the hay from the carriage into the building in front of them, he decided to ask Valyr something. "So, what are you planning to do next?" "I'll probably stay here," said Valyr in response. "Although I've definitely enjoyed your company during the latter portion for this journey, I don't really want to become a burden for you. I'll stay here and establish a foothold of sorts. Perhaps, by the time you get back here, I might surprise you." Hearing his words, Trindle let out a bit of laughter. However, this laughter did not contain any mocking intent whatsoever. Instead, it contained feelings of interest towards the words Valyr had just uttered out. "Is that so? Well, if that's the case, I might probably surprise you by the time I get back here as well. Want to bet on who'll surprise the other more once we meet up again?" "I'll probably take you up on that." Valyr grinned in response, feeling like the person in front of him was a friend he had made years ago, even though they've only met for a day. With their conversation done, Trindle went ahead and hauled the hay from his carriage into the building, coming out a few minutes later with a smile on his face as he looked at Valyr. After that, he rummaged something from his pocket before throwing it at Valyr. "Here, catch this." As Valyr caught the item that was thrown at him, his eyes slightly widened in surprise before looking back at Trindle. "Are you sure? Take it as a thanks for accompanying me throughout the journey," replied Trindle. "Don't go using that money and indulgences, you hear?" "I won't." Valyr wryly smiled in response while looking at the item, a small money pouch, once more. Opening it, he counted the number of coins that were in the bag, which amounted to 100 copper coins. Inwardly nodding as he placed it in one of his pockets, Valyr then gave Trindle a long embrace as the two were about to bid farewell to each other. However, before the two could truly part ways, Trindle stopped Valyr, telling him, "Before we forget, let's add each other on our friend list first." Hearing that, Valyr nodded in response as he pulled up the system, adding the man in front of him into his friend list. While doing so, he was reminded once more about how the NPCs in Greater Beyond were far more realistic than any of the other NPCs he had come across in other games. According to what the company mentioned in his previous life, each of the NPCs in Greater Beyond had brains powered through quantum supercomputing, allowing their movements, actions, and responses to be as lifelike as possible, making the players feel like they were talking to actual humans in the game. Though, their uniqueness didn't stop there. Aside from being incredibly lifelike, they also had access to almost all of the features players had access to, including the system. With that, it was no surprise that there existed some parties in Valyr's previous life that was composed of both NPCs and players. In fact, some NPCs were even part of the rankings due to their illustrious achievements. Looking at his friend list gain the name of the man before him, Valyr nodded at Trindle once more as he finally bade farewell, turning around to walk around the village as he muttered sometime later, "It seems I should really start getting stronger." Ding! Friend list. Trindle Valtharan, level 7, rank 0 class, civilian. Once we meet up again in the future, you'll definitely be in for a surprise, Trindle. With that in mind, Valyr closed the screen in front of him as he walked around the village for a while, eventually finding himself in front of a building that seemed to stand out among the other buildings in the area. For one, the material making up the building gave off the feeling that it was sturdier than the stone making up the other buildings. Not only that, but a wooden sign stating the building's purpose could be seen on top of the building's entrance. Eardo Guard Barracks. Valyr murmured as he read the text written on the sign. Afterwards, a knowing grin appeared on his face as he walked into the building. Heading deeper into the building, Valyr began to admire the simplistic design of the place, which gave off the feeling that the building reflected the type of people living in this space. People who made no room for wasted movement. While walking around the corridors to find a person he could ask a few questions to, Valyr allowed his body to absent-mindedly wander as he brought up all of the plans he had come up with so far to the surface of his mind. For now, I can only set broad goals. However, as time passes and my capabilities grow larger, I'll be able to set more specific ones, he muttered inwardly. In any case, there are only 2 goals I have in mind at the moment: to form an organization capable of withstanding the final battle, and choose the class that'll bring me to the very end. As to how he had decided that these 2 goals were the most important compared to everything else, Valyr thought back to the period before the final battle, where those part of the faction he was in moved without a certain goal in command. Although a basic sense of unity could be found, there was still disarray prevalent throughout every move, which would have been easily resolved if there was a strong, unifying voice among the ranks. With that in mind, he thought that an organization forming the core of that voice would probably be the best option, with each member of that organization acting as a pillar. Thinking about this, he scratched the back of his head as he wryly smiled. Well, I should probably put this at the back burner for now, considering that I don't even have the strength nor influence to form such an organization yet. Though, that leads me to the other goal, a class that'll take me to the end. Unlike the first goal, this one was self-explanatory. After all, not having the required strength to take part in the final battle would mean that everything Valyr had done to reach that point would be for naught. With this line of thought, An urge welled up inside him to choose one of the 6 main classes of the game, thinking that having a class would definitely give him the firepower he needed for the end. However, after pondering over it for a bit more, this urge died down as a sobering thought surfaced in his mind. I have no experience with the 6 main classes: warrior, defender, pugilist, assassin, arcanist, and acolyte. These were the 6 main classes available for all players to choose in Greater Beyond as long as they reached level 10. Of course, these classes were also available for the NPCs at the same level. To some, it could be said that these were the worst classes to choose at the start, as they could be obtained without even having to put in any effort. Naturally, when there were classes that could be obtained without even needing to do anything, there were also classes that could be obtained by meeting certain prerequisites. In fact, the class Valyr took up in his previous life was one of the latter. As to what it was considered one of the 3 production classes with the greatest renown in Greater Beyond alongside alchemist and tailor. The blacksmith. As he recalled the class he chose in his previous life, he felt that choosing it in this life wouldn't be a bad idea as well, considering that he had information that would allow this class of his to shine further. Although I could choose the 6 classes, I don't really have a lot of experience in them. On the other hand, if I choose to take up the blacksmith class again, I could hastily speed through the ranks and reach an even greater height than before. Although he was rubbing his chin in ponderation, once he had laid out the facts in that manner, the choice for Valyr became incredibly simple. Guess I'm becoming a blacksmith again, he thought to himself as he let out a light chuckle. However, to reach that point, I'll have to meet the prerequisites first. And that's why I'm going to join the village guards. Thankfully, after wandering around the building's corridors for a while, he had eventually spotted the back of a man wearing a dark blue uniform, prompting Valyr to walk up to him. It'll take me forever to become a blacksmith if I don't establish a footing of some sort. In any case, for someone like me, who has no strength nor reputation whatsoever, joining the village guards is probably the easiest way to do that. Ending his thoughts there, he tapped on the shoulder of the man he had walked up to, prompting the latter to look back at him. Noticing the person's confusion, Valyr gave the man a small, respectful bow before saying his piece. "Hello there, sir. I was wondering if it was possible to join the village guards." Hearing Valyr's words, the confusion on the man's face instantly disappeared as he quickly connected the dots as to why Valyr was behind him. Becoming silent for a bit, the man lightly nodded before replying, "Although I'd be lying if I said we need more guards, I don't have the authority to do that. If you walk in that direction, you'll find the leader's office. You should ask him instead." With that, the man pointed in a certain direction, prompting Valyr to start heading in that direction as he thanked the man. "Thanks for the help. Can I get your name?" "The name's Leon." Leon lightly smiled in response. "If the leader does accept you as a village guard, let me know." "I definitely will." Saying those words, he thanked Leon once more before bidding farewell, slowly making his way to the end of the direction Leon had pointed in. A few minutes later, Valyr stopped in front of a closed door, feeling a small hint of nervousness as he looked at the words written on the door's window. Damian Waters, Astardo Guard Leader. Muttering the words written on the door, Valyr took in a deep breath to calm down his nerves. Then, with a light sigh, he knocked 3 times on the door in front of him. "Come in." In response to his knocks, a deep, masculine voice resounded from the other side of the door, giving Valyr the feeling that such words should not be ignored. With that, Valyr took yet another deep breath before opening the door, eventually facing eye to eye with the man on the other side of the door. At first, a hint of incredulity could be seen on Valyr's face as he did not expect such a voice to come from the man he was looking at. In his mind, a voice like that would come from a middle-aged man who had weathered through multiple trials and tribulations. However, the man in front of him showed anything but appearing to be a man in his late 20s. Though, with a few creases on the man's face showing that his life so far had been anything but simple, Valyr still felt a slightly older vibe coming from the man. Then again, it did not help that the man had a head of neatly combed silver hair, complementing the man's dark blue irises that seemed to tell the vicissitudes of time. "Is there anything I could help you with?" the man asked as Valyr closed the door. If you just came in to waltz around, please leave the building. Civilians like you shouldn't be here, after all. Actually, I was planning to apply as a village guard, Valyr said in response. The personality he thought he had discarded near the end of his life appearing once more as his voice at the end became somewhat meek. For some reason, he had a feeling that the man sitting down in front of him had taken his words as a joke. However, what happened instead could only be summed up as odd. Is that so? Well, I'm glad you asked. Hearing the man's response to his words, Valyr slightly tilted his head in confusion. Although he understood what the man said, at the moment, he wondered whether the two of them were on different wavelengths. With that in mind, he cleared his throat as he decided to repeat himself. I'm not sure if you've misunderstood me, sir, but let me repeat just in case. I want to be a part of the village guards. Oh yeah, I understood you loud and clear, the man said in response. That's why I said I'm glad you asked. But that's not the usual response to that, was the only thing that could come out of Valyr's mouth after noticing the man's nonchalance. Also, what does that mean anyway? It means you're now part of us, the man replied, standing up from his seat to come closer to Valyr. To be honest, I was already wondering for some time where I'd find another person that wants to become a village guard. I guess the skies have decided to grant my wish. Thanks. Scratching his head in response, Valyr felt like this whole process was far too simple. From what he could recall through his memories, even small organizations like the village guards would have the player undergo through a test whenever they wanted to become a part of them. As he mulled over this, a thought suddenly surfaced in his mind. Is it because I'm also an NPC? If that's the case, then that's definitely a weight off my shoulders. However, it still feels too fishy for it to be this simple, he thought soon after, looking at the man before him. Is it really that easy to join the village guards? Shouldn't I have to go through a test? Or something? You've already went through a test. Actually, said the man in response, prompting Valyr to perk up his ears. However, the man's next words only made him want to cough up blood. A test to see whether you're willing to become part of the village guards or not. Since you've decided to volunteer for the position, then that means you've passed the test. Does that answer your question? The man asked, to which Valyr shook his head. I didn't mean a test like that. What I meant was a test that checks one's combat capabilities. Well, if you put it that way, there's not really any need for that, the man said in response as he decided to sit back down. Noticing the curious expression on Valyr's face, the man went ahead and explained. Here's the thing. The strongest people in this village have only reached the peak of their rank 1 class, only amounting to around 5 people or so. On the other hand, the majority of people in this village still haven't reached rank 1 yet. Now, with that in mind, do you still think such a test like that is necessary? The man asked Valyr, exuding a bit of the power he had towards him. At that moment, Valyr quickly realized that the man in front of him was included in the number of people who had reached the peak of rank 1, feeling his body slightly shuddering from the pressure. Knowing when to stop, Valyr shook his head in response as he took in a deep breath to calm himself down. I understand. As long as you understand, then that's good, said the man as he stood up once more, placing his hand on Valyr's shoulder as he looked at him. Welcome to the Eardo Village Guards. The name's Damien Waters, your guard leader. You could call me Damien, Sir Waters, anything is fine. How about you? What's your name? Damien asked in response. Valyr, sir. Valyr Zeihardt, replied Valyr, which made Damien's eyes slightly widen for a brief moment before quickly returning to normal. Well, nice to have you become part of the guards, Valyr. I hope you'll help us maintain the village's peace and prosperity. Saying those words, a smile appeared on Damien's face, making Valyr think that the man in front of him wasn't actually that scary if one ignored him being at the peak of rank 1. Just as he thought that their conversation would end there, Damien went ahead and dragged Valyr by the arm as the two of them left the room. Since you're now officially part of the village guards, then it shouldn't be a surprise that I should take you on a tour around the barracks, no? I guess. Realizing that it would take a while for him to grasp the whole personality of the man before him, Valyr decided to just go with the flow for now, allowing Damien to do whatever he wanted. With that, the two of them walked around the various portions of the barracks. Damien was at the front, explaining everything Valyr needed to know about the purpose of the certain portion they were in, as well as the history that came along with said portion. While on this impromptu tour, Damien stopped all of a sudden as he looked back at Valyr, slapping his forehead. Damn, to think I almost forgot. Give me a second. Let me add you to the organization's roster. Soon after, a screen appeared in front of Damien's face as he tapped a few buttons and made a few gestures. A few seconds later, a notification sound resounded within Valyr's mind. In response to that, he commanded the system to bring up his notification screen, allowing him to read through the notifications he had received. Ding! You have affiliated yourself with the Eardo village guards. Your current rank is guard. Increase your merit to raise your position. You have unlocked the contribution point shop. Do tasks for the organization to earn contribution points. Closing up the screen in front of him after reading through the notifications, Valyr looked at Damien, prompting the latter to explain as Damien understood what Valyr wanted to know. We have two systems in place, the merit point system and the contribution point system. Although both of those points could be earned by doing tasks as a village guard, the two of them have different purposes. The merit point system dictates what positions you could take up. The lowest rank is guard, followed by veteran guard, guard captain, and lastly, guard leader. Taking a deep breath, he continued. As for the contribution point system, it's what allows you and the other guards to purchase certain items that couldn't be purchased out in the village. As long as you have enough contribution points, you could choose to get better weapons, better equipment, better skills, better items, better everything really. Damien shrugged his shoulders as he said this. Well, since you're part of us, I should also let you know that we also have special skills available here, but we don't really have a great selection of them. Plus, that's only available if you're a guard captain at the very least and have a lot of contribution points to waste. Hearing the term special skills come out of Damien's mouth, Valyr blanked out for a bit, only to snap back to reality sometime later as he decided that now wasn't the best time to think about it. Placing the thought at the back of his head for now, Valyr nodded in response to Damien's explanation as the two of them continued to walk once more. Well, with that out of the way, let's have you choose your weapon, shall we? Nodding in response to Damien's words, the two of them continued to walk through the barracks corridors, with Damien continuing to explain the purpose and the history of the sections they passed by. At that point, Valyr was half-heartedly nodding in response to every explanation, wanting nothing more than to get away and be able to do his own thing. Eventually, this monotony was broken as they had arrived at a certain portion of the barracks, prompting Damien to stop walking. Looking at the sight before them, Valyr softly let out a sigh of awe, not expecting a starter village to have a place like this. Then again, I haven't really joined any organization at the early stages back then. I should probably keep in mind that this might be commonplace in villages. Although it looked somewhat empty, the makings of what could become a priceless armory in the future was in front of them. To the left were uniforms similar to the uniform Damien was currently wearing. On the other hand, the right was filled with racks and boxes filled to the brim with weapons made out of wood. As for the center, actual weapons made out of metal were shown on display, their blades truly having the property to kill anything that touched it. Unlike the weapons made out of wood, there was an air of ferocity around these weapons. Welcome to the equipment room, Valyr. In here, all the weapons and uniforms you might use as a guard could be obtained, Damien explained, heading to the left section. As for skill books and miscellaneous items, those are in another section. Snapping his fingers to catch Valyr's attention sometime later, Damien then gave him 3 sets of the uniforms he currently wore. Here you go. As per custom for any newcomer to the Eardo village guards, they're given 3 sets of the usual guard uniform. If your uniform gets dirty, you can always come here and have your uniform cleaned free of charge. Of course, better uniforms, as well as equipment that can go over your uniform, are also available here, he added. But that's only if you have contribution points to spend. Speaking of contribution points, you could join the night patrol later, Damien said after that. Unlike day patrols, the amount of contribution points you could get from it is around twice or thrice as much. Naturally, the same goes for merit points. Let me think about it for now, replied Valyr, making Damien nod as he headed to the right section of the room. He then gestured Valyr to come closer, to which the latter lightly nodded in response as he moved to where the racks and boxes of wooden weapons were. As Valyr looked at the various types of weapons available for him to choose from, Damien opened his mouth to speak. "Do you have your own weapon?" In response to the question, Valyr shook his head. Lightly nodding, Damien spoke once more. "Since that's the case, as per custom for any newcomer to the Eardo village guards, they're given the freedom to choose any wooden weapon free of charge. Of course, the wooden weapon is just a stand-in until you have enough contribution points to buy an actual weapon made out of metal. Though, if you end up sticking with the wooden weapon you chose, that's also fine." Damien shrugged his shoulders. Weapons aren't the only thing that dictate a person's combat power, after all. Anyways, go ahead, Valyr. Choose the weapon that you think will suit you the best. Saying those words, Damien nudged Valyr a bit, prompting the latter to take a step forward as he looked at the weapons in front of him. After looking at his choices for a while, Valyr eventually looked back at Damien. "What if I don't end up choosing a weapon? Prefer fighting with your fists?" "Yeah, that's not a problem either," Damien replied with a light nod. "If you end up coming to the conclusion that you prefer to fight with your fists, we'll give you a set of leather knuckles. However, it'll be on loan, needing you to undergo through multiple patrols to pay off the cost of contribution points to get it." "Not really what I had in mind, but sure." Nodding in response to Damien's words, Valyr returned his attention to the weapons he could choose from, picking up some of them from time to time to test them out. However, even though he picked those weapons to test them out, all of them made him shake his head, giving him the feeling that he wouldn't be able to wield them well. Eventually, after exhausting the various weapon types he could choose from, Valyr stood in front of a rack containing what looked like glorified poking sticks. Picking up one of them, he instantly felt like a connection had been made between him and the weapon, eliciting a wry smile to appear on his face as he scratched his head. "Well, I guess it makes sense. I did use this as my main weapon in the past. Anyway, if I think about it, that also probably explains why the other weapons don't give me the same feeling. After all, unlike this weapon type, I don't have much experience in them." Looking at the weapon he had picked up once more, he looked back at Damien before raising up the weapon he held. "I'll be choosing this one. The spear, eh?" Damien raised his eyebrow with a hint of interest. "That's definitely a rare choice in this place. However, if you think that weapon is the perfect fit for you, then by all means, I won't stop you." After saying those words, he gave Valyr a long strip of fabric, which he had picked up from a box nearby. Receiving the fabric strip, Valyr then used it to securely tie the wooden spear to his back, making Damien nod in satisfaction. "With just the weapon alone, you're now giving off the air of a village guard. Once I finish touring you through this place, go ahead and change into the uniform," he said. "It's definitely more comfortable than what you're wearing right now." Hearing those words, Valyr briefly glanced at the clothes he currently wore. Comparing the coarse and chalky fabric his clothes were made out of to the smooth and soft fabric of the uniforms, Valyr made a mental note to change into the uniform as the two of them moved away from the equipment room. Aside from the treasury, which you could access through the contribution point shop in your system, this is the final room in this barracks that's of importance. After walking through the corridors for a bit more, the two of them stopped in front of a wide field with the ground visible. Multiple training dummies could be seen scattered on the field, with some of them being occupied by a few people as target practice. Naturally, there's not much point in having the skills, but not the experience to use them. After all, a skill means the difference between life and death, Damien said. And that's why we have the training field. Speaking of which, one of the other guards who chose the spear is at the training field right now. Looking at the man Damien pointed at, a thought instantly surfaced in Valyr's mind as he watched the man fight against the dummy with his spear. That's definitely an oddball. Continuing to watch the man attack the dummy in front of him with his spear, Valyr gradually grew more certain of the first impression he had of the man. Unlike other people who would repeatedly utilize their skills or do a string of basic attacks against their dummies, the man Damien pointed at instead looked at the dummy in front of him with an eerie calm, muttering something under his breath as the grip over his spear changed from time to time. After a moment of silence, the man would then step back, strike once with the spear, then nod in satisfaction before repeating the cycle all over again. Watching the man repeat the cycle for a few times, Valyr eventually looked at Damien, who nodded at him as he knew what the former was thinking. With that in mind, Damien told him, "Well, with that, the tour has been concluded. If you have any other questions, you could always head to my office if I'm there. If I'm not there, just ask around." Nodding in response to Damien's words, Valyr gave him a few words of gratitude, prompting a light smile to appear on Damien's face as the latter turned around, gradually making his way back to his office. However, before he had even taken a single step, his head turned around to look back at Valyr. "Thankfully, I remember this time around. Are you going to join the night patrol later, or are you going to join the day patrol tomorrow?" Now that he had the time to ponder over it for a bit, Valyr finally gave him an answer. "I'll probably join the night patrol. However, is it fine if I change my mind later?" "Sure." Damien nodded. "Just head to my office and inform me beforehand." "Will do." With Valyr nodding in response, the two finally went their separate ways, leaving Valyr to his own devices. Taking in a deep breath, Valyr eventually let out a long sigh of relief as he headed to another part of the barracks, specifically the cafeteria, to grab a bite. Now that I'm officially part of the village guards, I can finally start making progress towards the goal of having my rank 1 class be a blacksmith. "System, show me my status screen," he inwardly commanded not long after, causing a small screen to appear in front of his field of vision. Ding! Valyr Zeihardt. Class: Civilian. Rank 0. Species: Human. Level 1. Power level: 9C. HP: 10 out of 10. MP: 10 out of 10. Stats: 1 VIT, 1 STR, 1 AGI, 1 DX, 1 INT, 1 WS, 1 PR, 1 LUK, 1 unassigned point. Remarks: nothing stands out. Incredibly normal. Looking at his status screen, which hadn't really changed, Valyr gradually focused his attention on the upper portion of his status screen. "Once I reach level 10, I'll be able to ascend to a rank 1 class, as well as evolve my species." In Greater Beyond, there were certain levels that acted as watersheds that one would have to pass through if they wanted to increase their power even further. The first watershed any player and NPC would come face-to-face with was the level 10 watershed, being the crossroads that would mark the path of a being's specialization. As all beings had the same rank 0 class at the beginning, the civilian class, it went without saying that one's rank 1 class would have the greatest level of importance in terms of choices a being would make. Because of that, Valyr was going to make sure that he would be able to have the blacksmith class as an option in his ascension. However, that was only his baseline. With the memories he had carried from his previous life, he knew that there were variants to the blacksmith class, with most of them being far better choices. Considering the feasibility of some of them with his current capabilities, he had narrowed his choices down to a couple variant classes, all of which he felt he would be able to achieve before the beta version began. As for his species, which would change once he had ascended to a rank 1 class, there wasn't really much he could do to obtain a better choice. Instead, he already knew what species he would choose once he had ascended to rank 1. With that species, and with one of the rank 1 classes I'm thinking of, my strength will definitely snowball in the long run. In any case, I should start increasing my combat power first, he thought as he placed everything else at the back of his head, arriving at the cafeteria. After grabbing some food, he sat on one of the free tables in the area before munching on the food he chose. I wouldn't be able to get the skills I need if I don't have the strength to back it up. Plus, if I want to make sure our side gets a fighting chance at the final battle, I'll have to increase my strength either way. As he chowed down on his food, he continued to think about the things he could do right now. Specifically, things he could do to bolster his combat power before the night patrol later. Feeling revitalized from the meal he ate, he then left the cafeteria as he looked out one of the windows, noticing that the sun had already gone past its peak. With that in mind, he hastened his steps slightly, eventually arriving at the training field once more sometime later. Entering the place, he noticed that the odd man with the spear was still there, making Valyr wonder for a bit as to whether the man had eaten yet. However, he placed the thought at the back of his head as he headed to one of the many unoccupied training dummies in the space, eventually choosing one that was somewhat far away from the other occupied dummies. Looking at the odd man for a bit more, Valyr unfurled the fabric, affixing the wooden spear to his back before tightly gripping onto the ladder. Getting a feel of the wooden spear he had chosen for a bit, he then took a few steps back as he focused on the training dummy in front of him. Well, everyone has their own way of improving. If that's what works for him, then there's no reason for me to change his ways. Then again, my method for improvement is pretty weird. Chuckling at his inner thoughts, he then charged forward before thrusting out with his spear, landing a clean strike on the training dummy. After a few seconds, he then retrieved the spear before gripping it with his other hand. Then, with no hesitation, he thrust his spear out once more, landing yet another strike on the dummy. With the cycle in place, Valyr went ahead and repeated the same thing over and over again, feeling a hint of pain coursing through his arms by the time each arm had struck against the dummy around 20 times. Nevertheless, he gritted his teeth and ignored it, allowing his muscle memory to take over as he continued to strike against the dummy. At first glance, one would think that he was training himself to become ambidextrous with the spear, allowing him to fight against the enemy even if one of his arms were unusable. However, in reality, the reason why Valyr was doing this seemingly monotonous cycle was not for that exact reason. Instead, it was for an entirely different reason. Ding! You have gained a hint on how to wield the spear better. Seeing the notification, a light grin appeared on Valor's face as he continued attacking the dummy. Bingo! Since I obtained the notification, then that means I'm heading in the right direction, Valyr muttered to himself, continuing to strike against the dummy with the spear, feeling that both of his arms were on the verge of falling off. However, he still persevered and gritted through the pain, thinking that this pain was just a small price to obtain a skill he would rely on in the long run. Indeed, a skill. The reason why he was using both arms to strike the dummy with his spear was to obtain a skill. In Greater Beyond, there were 3 main methods as to how one would obtain new skills. The first and most obvious method would be to obtain it through the use of skill books. These skill books would either be available in certain shops, such as the contribution point shop of the village guards, or they could be obtained through happenstance. Of course, there were those who weren't bounded by morality, obtaining their skill books through the murder of players and NPCs alike. The second method would be to ascend to a higher class and evolve one species. Although skill books were the most obvious method to obtain new skills, ascending to a higher class was considered the most common method of obtaining increasingly stronger skills. As for evolving one species, the chances of obtaining a skill from it was lower. However, when it did give a skill, it would definitely bring a great increase to the person's combat power. With that, the third and final method of obtaining skills was to obtain them through quests as rewards. Depending on the type and difficulty of the quest one took, the quality of the skill would differ. Though, unlike skills obtained through ascension, wherein the strength of the skill would be limited by the person's level, obtaining skills through quests allowed for a person to wield a skill far beyond their level at a lower level. In fact, that was what most players did at the beginning to gain an edge over other players. Of course, Valyr was also going to do that once he had gotten stronger. However, unlike the first 3 methods, there was one more method of obtaining a skill that went under the radar for a very long time. It was only when a certain player had revealed that their strongest skills were obtained through this method was it finally made known to the masses. As to what method it was considered the most tedious among the 4. Repetitive movement. Ding! You have gained a sense of how to wield the spear better. Obtaining another notification from the system, Valyr decided to stop for now as the feeling of his arms screaming out of pain could not be ignored anymore. Dropping the wooden spear in front of the training dummy, he went ahead and moved towards one section of the field to grab some water to quench his thirst. While doing so, he took a look outside, noticing that about a couple of hours had already passed since he started the grind for the skill. A few minutes later, Valyr returned to the front of the training dummy, picking up the wooden spear once more as the pain in his arms had somewhat subsided. With that, he allowed his muscle memory to take over once more as he struck against the dummy, with a bit more force than before. With the passage of time, the feeling of striking out with his spear gradually became more and more familiar to him. With each strike, he would notice the slight errors in his movement, prompting him to correct it on the next strike, where it would be able to hit the dummy with a bit more force than before. This feeling spurred Valyr on, telling him that his hard work would eventually pay off as long as he stuck to it. Eventually, wanting to ignore the pain radiating from his once more, he decided to watch the odd man while his body continued to strike against the dummy in front of him. I definitely have to admire his tenacity to still be at the training field, even though many hours had passed. Looking at the entire training field, Valyr quickly noticed that a great portion of the people that were here when he came had already left. In fact, the only person that was still here from when he came was the odd man with the spear. I wonder how long he's been at it? Wait, wasn't he already here even before I occupied a training dummy? Has he even eaten yet? Although Valyr, slightly worried about the man, he returned his attention to the training dummy before him, deciding that he would ask the man if he ever saw him again. Well, everyone's responsible for their own choices. With that, he continued to strike against the training dummy, eventually having to support his striking arm with a free arm whenever he struck with the spear. Even though every fiber of muscle on his arms were screaming out in agony at this point, Valyr ignored it and gritted his teeth, getting the feeling that what he wanted was near. And near it indeed was. After taking a 1-minute break to let the pain radiating from his arms gradually subside, Valyr took in a deep breath as he looked at the training dummy in front of him, now covered in multiple strike marks from the incessant number of strikes he had made. As he gripped on the spear with his dominant hand, he felt like his next strike seemed more correct all of a sudden, getting into a battle-ready stance as he thrust the spear out once more. Whoosh! As the spear moved through the air, Valyr instantly felt like everything had finally clicked, causing the spear to move with greater speed, giving off the feeling that it was like a serpent aiming to deal the final blow. Thud! With far more force than any of the strikes he had landed before, the spear collided with the training dummy as a dull thud faintly resounded throughout the field. Soon after, a sound Valyr was waiting to hear for quite some time had finally resounded in his mind. Ding! You have gained a basic grasp of wielding the spear. You have gained the passive skill Basic Spear Mastery. Seeing the notifications he had been waiting to see for quite some time, Valyr dropped the spear he was holding before clenching his fists in excitement, raising them both up in the air. Instantly feeling a shooting pain coming from both arms, he quickly put both arms down as he silently celebrated the first step he took towards his goals. Taking in a few deep breaths to calm down from the excitement, Valyr went ahead and picked up the spear before affixing it to his back once more. Looking at the training dummy he had been hitting for the past few hours for one last time, he then left the training field, his steps having a slight spring to them. While walking along the corridors, he took a look outside, noticing that there were still a couple hours before the sun had set. With that in mind, he stood in place as he pondered over something for a bit. Then, with a slight shake of his arms, he continued to walk. However, instead of heading to the Barak's dormitory to take a rest, which was what he was going to do at first, he instead made his way to the Barak's entrance as an enticing thought echoed out in his mind. Since there's still time before the night patrol, how about I gain some actual experience? Man, my arms are definitely going to be sore after all this. As he made his way to the entrance, Valyr went ahead and brought up the description of the skill he had just obtained. Ding! Basic Spear Mastery, LV, 1 out of 10. Rarity, Common. A skill given to those who have gained a basic understanding of the spear, allowing them to stand out among the crowd. Increases damage dealt with a spear by 1%. Reading through the description of the skill, Valyr let out a boisterous chuckle as he finally left the barracks, slowly making his way to the village gates. Why was I expecting the skill to be good from the get-go? The skill I just got is only common rarity. The only way for it to get better is if I level up with a bit of experience, which is exactly what I'm about to do. Thinking about this, a determined expression appeared on his face as he touched the spear affixed to his back. Unlike other games of the same genre, the system Greater Beyond had in place for leveling was somewhat different. Normally, in a game, one would gain experience that would go towards one's level if they killed a monster or did a task that would give them experience. As for one's skills, it would gain experience as long as one continued to use it. On the other hand, the experience in Greater Beyond was considered a type of universal currency. The methods of gaining experience were still the same, which was either through killing monsters, doing quests, or doing miscellaneous tasks that gave experience. However, rather than having the experience be automatically allocated towards one's level or one's skills, the person would instead have the choice of allocating it towards their level or towards their skills. Due to this, there were a lot of people in the game that had incredibly strong skills, yet had low levels. Of course, the opposite could also be said, their minds thinking that having a high level would attract more attention towards them, only for their skills to be sorely lacking in comparison. Speaking of which, should I have asked permission from Damien first that I was heading out of the village? At some point in his trek, this question gradually surfaced in Valyr's mind as he rubbed his chin. Because of it, his pace gradually slowed down as he turned around to gauge how far he was from the barracks. Then he returned his gaze to his front, gauging his distance from the village gates out in the distance. After comparing his proximity between the two, he eventually decided that he would continue heading for the village gates, considering that he was closer to the latter compared to the former. In any case, I'll have to ask Damien about it by the time I get back. With that question answered, he continued to walk along the streets, taking in the sights surrounding him as he eventually left the village through the gates around half an hour later. As he walked along the only road that extended past the village gates, Valyr flexed his arms for a bit, noticing that the pain he had felt before was now more or less gone. With that in mind, he unfurled the fabric around his chest as he grabbed the spear behind his back, tightly gripping on it. He continued to walk for a while in search for a monster to fight against. I should really get the analysis skill as soon as possible, he thought to himself, continuing to keep an eye out for monsters that were alone. Although I have the ability to identify monsters before I fight them, I'll only be able to obtain information on their levels. Plus, having analysis would allow me to identify far more than just the enemies I'll face. As he thought this, his eyes noticed a lone wolf not far away from where he was. Checking around the area to see if the wolf had just parted from a wolf pack nearby, Valyr slowly made his way to the wolf once he found out that the wolf was truly alone. Making sure to have the initiative once he started fighting against the wolf, he put less weight on his steps, reducing the amount of sound he made. Thankfully, by the time he had gotten close enough to identify the wolf's level, the wolf still hadn't noticed his presence, prompting him to let out an inward sigh of relief as he identified his enemy through the system. Ding! Level 1 wolf. I really need to get the analysis skill, muttered Valyr inwardly as the information he had received from the system further reinforced the need. In any case, this wolf in front of me is definitely a good first target to get used to fighting again. Taking into consideration that our stats are probably on par, it's all up to how much combat experience I have if I want to be victorious. Taking in a long and deep breath, Valyr tightly gripped on his spear, bending his knees as he waited for the right moment to charge. Fortunately, that moment did not take long to appear, with the wolf's behind facing him a few seconds later. Whoosh! Exerting all of his strength towards his legs, he dashed towards the wolf at the greatest speed he could muster. In response to the sound Valyr made with the dash, the wolf's ears perked up, hurriedly turning towards the sound's origin to find out the identity of the being that intruded on its space. Unfortunately for the wolf, before it could even find out who the intruder was, Valyr came to an abrupt halt before the wolf, redirecting the momentum as he swept out with his spear, aiming for the wolf's front legs. "Huh! -5. With a dull thud, the blunt end of the spear collided with one of the wolf's legs head-on, causing the wolf's stance to somewhat falter. Letting out a pained howl, the wolf tried to stabilize itself with its other front leg as it bared its teeth towards its aggressor. However, rather than make another move to take advantage of the wolf's current situation, Valyr instead stood in place, gazing at the wolf for a bit as he took a few steps back. Through the crippling move he sent out to the wolf, a small portion of the combat experience he used to have in his previous life gradually resurfaced, prompting Valyr to grip on his spear once more as he charged forth yet again. Seeing as its aggressor was going to make another move, the wolf was on full alert, keeping track of the being's movement in front of him with its eyes. With light steps, its aggressor dashed forward, prompting the wolf to open its jaw in a bid to inflict a severe injury on the being's limbs. However, at the very last moment, its aggressor swiftly moved to the side as the wolf's jaw closed, biting on nothing more than thin air. It'll take a while for me to recover all of my past combat experience, but what I've already recovered is enough for me to do something like this. With a light grin on his face, giving off the feeling that he now controlled the tempo of the battle, he circled around the wolf, taking advantage of the wolf's limp leg to attack once more with a sweep. -8. Oh, whoa. Without hesitation, Valyr swept out with his spear, aiming for one of the wolf's hind legs, making sure that it was on the same side as the front leg he attacked earlier. In response to the attack, the wolf let out a loud, pained howl as it fell over to its side, realizing that its aggressor now had the ability to dictate its life and death. Realizing this, the wolf tried to escape, utilizing its still sturdy legs to trudge itself forward. However, without its other legs crippled with its aggressor's moves, the distance it could travel was nowhere near enough to get away from the aggressor before it. Seeing as there was no other way for it to escape its current predicament, the wolf howled out towards Valyr, telling him through its howl that it had no ability to fight anymore. It told him that it was willing to submit to the man before him, as long as it could be spared from death. Unfortunately, Valyr wasn't looking for a companion, nor could he understand the wolf's howl. Bang! -7. Feeling no shred of mercy whatsoever, he went ahead and thrust out his spear at full strength, piercing a hole through the wolf's throat before retrieving it soon after. As the wolf's eyes widened in shock at the sudden move, its consciousness slowly disappeared as it breathed out its last. Eventually, the wolf laid there on the ground, its gaze blank as it continued to wonder till its very last breath why it had suffered such an abrupt yet cruel fate. Ding! You have slain a level 1 wolf. You have gained 15 XP. On the other hand, Valyr was satisfied with how swift the fight against the wolf was. As he looked at the notification he received, he inwardly thanked the combat experience he had recovered from his first attack. Though, now that his first target had given him his share of experience, more and more of his previous combat knowledge continued to gradually surface, instilling a bit more confidence into Valyr as he continued to traverse the village's outskirts in search for more lone monsters to fight against. By the time the sun was about to set, Valyr looked at the monster in front of him with a solemn expression, watching its body continue to writhe as it struggled to hold on for dear life. Unfortunately, with the grievous injuries he had inflicted on the monster with his spear, it had eventually lost the battle, the strength it previously had slowly dissipating into thin air. Ding! You have slain a level 1 wild boar. You have gained 15 XP. I think this is enough for now, Valyr muttered as he shook off the blood still dripping from the tip of his wooden spear. After shaking it a couple more times, he then affixed it to his back with a strip of fabric given to him before making his way back to the village. In any case, I've recovered quite a bit of the combat experience I used to have in the past. Though, I'm not sure if it'll keep up once I get stronger, he muttered to himself, commanding the system to show him the amount of XP he had amassed so far. After killing 8 level 1 monsters, I now have a total of 120 XP. As he kept the value in mind, he went ahead and checked the amount of experience it would take for him to increase his level by 1. After that, he took a look at the amount of experience it would take for him to level up Basic Spear Mastery to level 2. So, I could increase my level to level 2 at the cost of 100 XP, or save it for now and use it to upgrade Basic Spear Mastery to level 2 in the future, which costs 250 XP. Pondering over it, it did not take long for Valyr to make a decision, as 100 XP was instantly deducted. Ding! 100 XP has been allocated. You are now level 2. All of your stats have been increased by 1 point. You have gained 1 unassigned stat point. Whoosh! Not long after he had received the notification that he had leveled up, energy that came out of nowhere surged throughout his body, giving him the feeling that he had the ability to do anything if he set his mind to it. However, this feeling was ephemeral at best, disappearing a few seconds later. Nevertheless, as Valyr moved his body, he instantly noticed the difference an additional point to all of his stats made. After all, from another perspective, his power had more or less doubled. With that, he decided to stop for a bit to gauge how much stronger he had gotten, slightly bending his knees down to stabilize his center of gravity before sending out a straight jab. As he sent it out, Valyr instantly understood that the power behind it would allow him to thrash the monsters from before without even breaking much of a sweat. Mulling over it for a bit more, he had a feeling that level 2 monsters would also pose no problem to him as long as he used the spear to attack. I'll allocate the unassigned stat points I have once I get back, or better yet, I'll allocate it whenever I need it. Satisfied with what he had figured out from the jab, he hastened his steps as he arrived at the village just a few minutes before the village gates would be closed for the night. Making his way to the barracks, he instantly headed towards the dormitory. Eventually, he found a room that was assigned to him, closing the door behind him before taking a whiff of the clothes he was wearing so far. "Phew, I stink," he murmured as he took his clothes off, wanting nothing more than to throw them in the trash. Dropping the wooden spear and the strip of fabric on the floor, he then headed to the bathroom to take a shower, feeling great delight and relief from it as he made sure to scrub every inch of his body. Around 10 minutes later, he left the bathroom, patting himself dry as he wore one of the uniforms Damien had given him earlier. Thankfully, I made a detour earlier to drop off the uniforms Damien gave me before I arrived at the cafeteria. If I didn't, I would have been probably searching for my room right now. After he was finished changing clothes, he folded up the clothes he wore earlier and placed them at a spot he would easily notice, making a mental note to have them washed when he came back. Picking up the wooden spear and the strip of fabric to affix the former to his back, he took notice of the standing mirror that was hung up in his room. Standing in front of it, it was only then did Valyr finally get a first glimpse on his appearance in this second life of his, muttering out in slight surprise, "Well, aren't I quite dashing?" Although his dark hair seemed somewhat messy, it greatly contrasted against his irises, which were silver gray in color, looking quite similar to pearls. Adding on his slightly chiseled jawline and his slim body, Valyr had a feeling that he would attract the attention of a couple of people just with his appearance alone. Even more so with the uniform he was currently wearing. Deciding that he had gotten his dose of compliments for the day, Valyr headed out of his room, making his way to the office where Damien was. It was time for him to do his night patrol. "Knock, knock, knock, come in." Hearing the deep voice on the other side of the room, Valyr inwardly let out a sigh of relief as he entered, coming face to face with the leader of the village guards once more. Although Damien had a slight frown on his face, considering that no one would knock on his office door at this hour, this frown quickly disappeared as he looked up to see who had knocked. In fact, a calm expression had replaced this frown, soon nodding in approval. "I see you've changed into the uniform. It fits you quite well." "Thanks," replied Valyr with a light smile. "I suppose you came here to ask me a few questions regarding the night patrol, right?" Damien asked after a moment of silence. Seeing Valyr nod in response to the question, he nodded back as he continued. "Well, for one, you'll only have to patrol until it turns midnight, or once the moon reaches the zenith. After that, you could return to the barracks and head to sleep. Or if you still feel restless once you get back, do whatever the hell you want. I've already mentioned to you earlier that those who decide to participate in the night patrol gain more contribution points and merit points compared to those in the day patrol," he continued. However, just as he was going to continue explaining more things about the mechanics of the night patrol, he faintly sensed that Valyr had gotten a bit stronger. With that, he stood up from his seat before walking around Valyr, the latter slightly confused as to what he was doing. After a bit of circling, he stopped in front of Valyr, his eyes slightly widened in surprise. "Well then, color me surprised. It seems you've been busy since the last time we've seen each other. And that's only been a few hours ago." "Yes." Even though the man in front of him said he was surprised, Valyr could not bring himself to believe that, considering the former's somewhat indifferent tone. "I've been practicing my skill with the spear after we parted ways. After that, I went outside the village to gain a bit of experience. I only came back to the village just recently, actually." As he said this, he decided to keep the fact that he had obtained basic spear mastery to himself for now. After all, such a thing was already unbelievable to hear, even more so if it came from someone like him, who was only level 1 not long ago. Nodding in satisfaction, Damien placed his hand on Valyr's shoulder before giving him a thumbs up. That's how a village guard should act, always finding time to improve themselves to protect the village far better. Though, since you mentioned that you've only just recently returned to the village, I'd suggest you opt out from participating in the night patrol today and take a rest, he continued, his eyes showing a hint of concern as he looked at him. After all, the human body can only withstand so much. Don't worry, Sir Damien. I know my limits, said Valyr in response as he thumped his chest. However, not long after, a faint sound resounded throughout the room, telling Damien otherwise. Rumble. Out of nowhere, Valyr's stomach started to grumble, prompting an awkward smile to appear on his face. In response to that, Damien raised his eyebrow for a bit before letting out a light sigh. Well, everyone's responsible for their own choices, so I can't really dissuade you if you still want to participate. Just make sure to grab something to eat before heading to the entrance. As Valyr nodded in response to his advice, Damien returned to his seat before a screen appeared in front of him. Tapping a couple of things on the screen, he then looked at Valyr, who received a notification from the system not long after as he opened up his screen. Ding! You have received a new quest. Night Patrol, difficulty E. As a guard of Eardo village, you have been tasked by the guard leader, Damien Waters, to patrol around the village at its most precarious period, the night. Although not much happens during this time, it's still highly advisable to remain vigilant. Quest rewards: 20 contribution points, Eardo Village Guards, 10 merit points, Eardo Village Guards, 25 XP. Would you like to accept the quest? Seeing the prompt at the very bottom of his screen, Valyr quickly accepted it as he soon bade his farewell to the man before him, leaving the latter on his own not long after. As for Damien, after watching Valyr's silhouette gradually get farther from the door to his office for a while, he returned to his seat, focusing his attention back on the documents laid out on his table. As to what was going on in his mind at the moment, only he knew. Following the advice given to him, Valyr made a quick detour to the barracks cafeteria, grabbing a light meal that made him feel full for the meantime. After that, he made his way to the entrance, noticing that 3 other people were already there, seemingly waiting for something. Hearing a bunch of footsteps gradually get louder from behind them, one of the 3 guards at the entrance turned to look back, quickly noticing Valyr get closer. Seeing that, the man waved at Valyr as a greeting, prompting the latter to wave back, albeit sheepishly. I haven't seen your face around these parts before. You a newcomer? The man asked, to which Valyr nodded in response. Yeah, I just enlisted as a village guard a few hours ago. Just as Valyr said those words, one of the other guards gave him a wide smile. Then, placing his hands on Valyr's shoulder, he let out a cackle. I had a feeling Damien would accept you in a heartbeat. In any case, glad to see you again. Hearing a somewhat familiar voice, Valyr redirected his gaze towards the person who just talked, eliciting a light smile to appear on his face as he thanked the man before him. Ah, glad to see you as well, Leon. Thanks for giving me the directions to Damien's office. No problem, no problem. After all, it's always great to have more people protecting the village, replied Leon with a grin. Anyways, I'll save the banter for later, he said not long after, his joyous expression instantly becoming stern. For now, I'll just do basic introductions since we have to start our night patrol soon. This man right here is Jonas. His specialty is fighting with the longsword. Specifically, the one around his waist, he continued, placing his hand on the shoulder of a tall, lanky man with short reddish-brown hair. As to why he's only good with that specific longsword, no one knows. As for the one who waved at you, his name's Louis, Leon said not long after, placing his other hand on the shoulder of a slightly hefty man with his black hair tied up into a ponytail. He's actually pretty good at tracking people. And last but not least, there's me, Leon. Pointing at himself, he concluded with a light smile, my specialty is taking hits. So, if you ever get yourself into a bet where one side needs to endure the most hits, I'm your man. "You can introduce yourself to us later after we finish patrolling," he said soon after, noticing that Valyr was about to open his mouth. "For now, since it's just the four of us patrolling this time around, we'll naturally have to split the village into 4 sections. Well, since you're the newcomer, how about you patrol over the southeast section?" Hearing the words that came out of Leon's mouth, Jonas and Louis glanced at each other for a bit, murmuring something before looking at Valyr with a hint of pity on their faces. Noticing this, Valyr looked at Leon, who was in the midst of splitting up the village into far more specific sections. Snapping his fingers to catch his attention, Valyr went ahead and asked him a question. "Is there a specific reason why you're giving me the southeast section?" In response to those words, Leon looked at Valyr for a bit before looking at the 2 other people with them. After looking back and forth between the 2 sides a couple of times, a dry smile appeared on Leon's face as he told Valyr, "Although I would prefer not explaining it to you, seeing as you've probably noticed something weird about the 2 when I said you're going to patrol the southeast section, you deserve to know a bit." Glaring at Jonas and Louis for a bit, he returned his attention back to Valyr as he explained. "The southeast section is an initiation of sorts for any person that has been newly inducted to the village guards. However, this only applies to those who decide to participate in the night patrol. For those who decide to participate in the day patrol, a different section is instead used as the place for initiation." Now, you might be wondering, why the initiation? He said, prompting Valyr to lightly nod in agreement. "Consider it the main way the guards find out if other guards can actually do their job properly, or if they're just there because of the prestige a village guard gets. Just like the section chosen for the day patrol, the southeast section for the night patrol is chosen as the spot for initiation since, more often than not, a great portion of the problems in the village arise there. Though, that's not to say other sections don't have problems of their own." "Does that answer your question?" asked Leon as he concluded his explanation. Seeing Valyr nod in response, he lightly nodded as the 4 of them talked about the specifics of where they were going to patrol for the night. After reminding each other once more about the time they were to return to the barracks, the 4 of them went their separate ways, with Valyr heading to the part of the village Leon demarcated as the southeast section. While walking along the streets that made up the southeast section, Valyr quickly noticed that most of the people along the streets were heading in the opposite direction, their somewhat hasty steps having purpose in them. As for the remaining few, they did not have to walk as far, with their houses being somewhat near to where they were by the time Valyr walked past. Surprisingly, even as the surroundings began to dim, a few of the people stopped walking for a bit and came up to greet him, thanking him for the work he was doing to keep the people of the village safe. Hearing their words of sincere gratitude, a light smile was plastered on his face as he continued to walk around the streets, his steps gaining a slight bounce to them. Nevertheless, seconds turned into minutes, and minutes turned to hours. Before he knew it, the moon was already up high in the sky. At this point, only a few people still walked along the streets aside from him. Some of them were somewhat intoxicated, making Valyr inwardly shake his head as he told them to return home as soon as possible. Then, there were those whose movements seemed somewhat suspicious, prompting him to tail them for a bit, only to find out that they would enter a house not long after. Listening to the sounds that faintly resounded behind the walls of the house those people entered, Valyr scratched the back of his head in slight embarrassment before starting to walk in the opposite direction. Leon made it seem like patrolling over the southeast section would be difficult, but it's not really much of a problem, he muttered to himself, noticing that he was the only one walking along the streets at some point. Taking a look at the sky to check the moon's position, Valyr decided to do one last sweep of the streets, wanted to make sure that there were no more people on the streets. Thankfully, by the time he had finished checking, no other people aside from him could be seen on the streets, making him let out an inward sigh of relief as he took a look at the moon's position once more. Judging by its current position, there's only around an hour or so before we can head back to the barracks. Rumble. Feeling his stomach grumble once more, a wry smile appeared on his face as he sat down on a nearby porch. "I should also probably get something to eat once I get back. In any case, what can I do to pass the time?" Valyr muttered to himself, eventually thinking of checking the contribution point shop which he now had access to after joining the village guards. With a quick command from the system, a small screen appeared before him, with tabs at the top to separate the items that could be bought from the shop into various categories: weapons, armor, accessories, skills, and items. Looking at the 5 tabs at the very top of the screen, he decided to check the skill tab for now, thinking that the equipment he had at the moment was more than enough for the current him. In an instant, a plethora of skills were shown to him on the screen, with a short description of the skill's purpose, as well as the cost to buy it with contribution points accompanying each one. "There's a lot of offensive and defensive skills here," said the young man as he browsed through what was available, clicking his tongue from time to time at the prices each skill commanded. "On the other hand, there are a lot less utility and support skills here. Fortunately, they have analysis available," he said sometime later after scrolling through the list for a bit, bringing up more information about it as a second screen appeared beside the first. Ding. Analysis. Rarity, common. A skill capable of identifying monsters and items. Increasing the skill's level allows the user to gain more detail into what they're identifying. Prerequisites. Guard rank. Cost. 200 contribution points. 200 contribution points with each night patrol, giving me 20 contribution points. I'll have to toil away at it for 10 days straight, he muttered, keeping a mental note of the price as he continued to scroll through the list. Huh. To think they actually have a rudimentary healing skill available. Ding. Inferior heal. Rarity, common. A skill capable of healing light injuries. Increasing the skill's level allows the user to heal more grievous injuries. Prerequisites. Veteran Guard rank. Cost. 1,500 contribution points. Looking at the prerequisites needed for him to buy the skill, Valyr could not help but click his tongue. Aside from the fact that I need to raise my rank to Veteran Guard, the fact that I would have to toil at it for over 2 months already makes me not want to get it. I wonder what other skills I could get from the shop that I could use. Just as he said these words, his ears picked up a sound coming from nearby, prompting him to stand up as he grabbed the spear behind his back. Moving closer to the origin of the sound, his nerves taut while tightly gripping on his spear, Valyr eventually let out a long sigh of relief when he found out what made the noise, or rather, who made the noise. Snickering, a man with spiky orange hair hunched behind a barrel near an obscure alleyway, trying his best to stifle his laughter. Though, once he found out that the man he was hiding from had found him, a grin appeared on his face as he waved at the man. "And here I thought you wouldn't find me," said Leon with a chuckle. In response to those words, Valyr relaxed his grip on the spear before slowly affixing it again behind his back. "Leon, why are you here? The patrol doesn't end for an hour more, no?" Normally, that would have been the case. Leon nodded in agreement with Valyr's words. However, at this moment, there are no more people wandering around the streets in my section. All of them have already returned to their respective homes. Then again, I could also say the same for your section, added Leon, not long after, whistling at how barren the streets in Valyr's section were. "If you're worried about our quest not being completed if we return to the barracks early, Damien told us to inform him if there were no more people in the streets if we plan to go back. Just so, we already did." Hearing those words, Valyr's mouth went slightly agape as he processed all of the information that had been given to him. After a while, he scratched his head as a wry smile appeared on his face. "Mind telling me more about these things whenever you're free?" Sure. Leon chuckled as he urged Valyr to come along with him. "It took me about a month to get used to the entire system in place for us guards, so no rush." "Well, I could tell you a few things while we meet up with Jonas and Louis," he continued as Valyr started to walk beside him. "First off, there's the messaging system. Since we're all part of the same organization according to the system." During their walk back, Leon had imparted quite a lot of useful information to Valyr, specifically information related to how organizations operated under the system Greater Beyond distributed to its NPCs. At some point, Jonas and Louis had met up with them, deciding to give Valyr information they knew, as well as their bonds gradually grew closer. Eventually, the 4 of them had arrived at the entrance of their barracks, just as the moon had reached the zenith. Ding! As if it was timed, Valyr obtained a notification from the system, prompting a screen to appear in front of him soon after. However, He wasn't the only one to do so, with Leon and the others opening up screens as well to check on their notifications. "Good job on your first night patrol," Leon said to Valyr while smiling, with Jonas and Louis also smiling as they nodded in agreement. "Although I was just planning to play a prank on you earlier, you've showed that you still remain vigilant even when everything is fine, something a guard should always have. I'll probably give Damien a small piece of my mind regarding your performance during this night patrol, but don't worry too much. What I say will definitely help you out," he said before waving farewell at the three, heading into the barracks first. Not long after, Jonas and Louis also bade farewell to Valyr, eventually leaving the latter alone on his own once more. Seeing as he was now alone, he decided to take a look at his notifications in greater detail, his eyes slightly widening in surprise as one notification stood out. "You have completed the quest Night Patrol. You have been rewarded 20 XP. You have been rewarded 20 contribution points. You have been rewarded 10 merit points. Earn 490 more merit points to raise your rank to Veteran Garda." Huh. So that means I need to do around 50 more night patrols if I want to increase my rank, Valyr muttered, nodding soon after as he headed into the barracks. However, rather than heading straight to the dormitory to take a rest, he instead made a detour to the cafeteria, recalling how he only had a light meal before going on the patrol. Surprised that there were still people manning the cafeteria at this hour by the time he arrived, Valyr quickly ordered a hearty meal from them, making sure not to waste their time. A few minutes later, he grabbed the tray of food given to him before making his way to a vacant seat to eat his late dinner. "Now that I think about it, I've done quite a lot, considering it's just my first day," he thought to himself, savoring each bite of the meal he had ordered. Not wanting to be stingy on himself, he ordered a slab of meat cooked to perfection, as well as sides that perfectly complemented the smoky yet savory taste of the meat. "I've obtained a passive skill, leveled up my stats, and even went on my first quest." Going over what he'd done so far, Valyr faintly nodded in satisfaction. Though, not long after, a bitter smile crept up onto his lips as he wasn't too eager to experience the aftereffects of overexerting himself. "However, if I want to make the most of the 60 days before the beta version starts, I'll have to do at least this much, if not more than what I'm already doing. After all, it wouldn't make sense for a low-leveled NPC to entice players into joining his organization. Now that he was an NPC and not a player anymore, the methods available for him to entice players and other NPCs in joining the organization he would make for the final battle was now limited. If back then he could utilize his real-life connections in order to amass a great number of people, as an NPC, the only thing he could rely on was his strength and the reputation he had. "I'll have to start thinking of ways to increase my reputation," he thought soon after, recalling multiple quests he could take in order to do just that. Though, the more he thought about it, the more his brows furrowed as he eventually let out a sigh. "The earliest quest I could take in order to increase my reputation is after I ascend to a rank 1 class. But that means I need to increase my strength as quickly as possible." How strength and reputation truly go hand in hand. Letting out yet another sigh, Valyr quickly finished the remaining food on his tray before returning the tray to the people, thanking them for the meal. After that, he slowly made his way to the dormitory, finally feeling the effects of exhaustion as his eyes started to close every once in a while. Noticing this, he slapped himself in the face a couple of times, making sure that he stayed awake until he arrived at his room. Though by the time he entered his room, he allowed his body's needs to take over, lying down on the bed with his uniform still on as Valyr quickly closed his eyes, gradually falling into a deep sleep. MNGH. Feeling like he had gotten his best sleep to date, Valyr's consciousness gradually sprung to life as the sun's faint rays pierced through his window, shining a light on his face. Tossing and turning around on his bed a couple times to move away from the rays, he eventually stopped doing so as he felt the bed start to absorb some of the sun's heat. Inwardly letting out a sigh, he gradually roused himself, sitting on his bed to do some light stretching with his upper body. God! However, rather than feel a sense of pleasure from stretching out his limbs, an indescribable pain instead spread throughout his body whenever he did so. Noticing this, Valyr wryly smiled as he softly muttered, "I knew my body would be sore by the time I woke up, but never did I expect myself to be this sore." Taking in deep breaths as he forced himself to stretch his body amidst the pain, he eventually got out of bed, stretching his lower limbs only to find out that they, too, felt sore as well. Accepting the fact that he felt sore all over, he sat down on the side of his bed for now, wondering if there was anything he could buy from the contribution point shop to alleviate the pain. "Let's check the items section," Valyr muttered to himself, scrolling through the list of items shown on the screen. After some time, his eyes slightly widened in surprise as he inwardly let out a sigh of relief, his attention focused on a certain item. Ah, thank the heavens. Ding. Pain relief pills. A bottle of pills designed to alleviate bodily pain within minutes. Highly advisable to only take one pill when needed. Prerequisites: guard rank. Cost: 10 contribution points. Seeing as he had twice as much contribution points than what was needed, Valyr unhesitatingly bought the item, wondering how the item would be delivered to him. However, contrary to his expectations, once he had accepted the prompt to buy the item, a small pill bottle manifested out of thin air in front of him, smoothly landing on his palms. Getting over his initial feelings of amazement from the unique delivery mechanic, he went ahead and opened the pill bottle, quickly counting that the number of pills in the bottle would last him for quite some time. Popping one out of the bottle, he then swallowed the pill alongside a few gulps of water, feeling immense relief wash over his body a few seconds later. "Although the pain's still somewhat there, it's not as intense as earlier," he muttered, taking less effort to stand up before making his way to the bathroom to take a shower. "In any case, I should rest my body for the time being. There's no point in me pushing my body to its limit if it means my health can take a turn for the worse," he thought, making sure to be thorough while scrubbing his body from head to toe. Once he got out from the bathroom a few minutes later, he took a quick whiff of the uniform he had worn to sleep, lightly nodding when he still smelled hints of a pleasant scent emanating from it. With that, he wore the uniform once more, smoothing out the wrinkles on its surface before affixing the wooden spear he had haphazardly placed on the ground last night on his back. After that, he left his room, making his way to the cafeteria to get some breakfast. By the time he got there, he noticed a few familiar faces, with a couple of them waving at them with a light yet tired smile on their faces. Obtaining the tray of food he had ordered, he gradually made his way to the people who waved at him before sitting beside them. "Good morning, Valyr. How was sleep?" Leon asked as Valyr took a bite of toast slathered with fruit jam. "It was good for the most part. Then I woke up," said Valyr in response, eliciting a bit of laughter from the others. "Well, that's no surprise," Jonas said, his tone somewhat deep since he had just woken up like the others. "Damien told us you push your body to the limits. Then you went ahead and participated in the night patrol on top of that." "I did tell him to take a rest after what he had done," replied a voice from afar, which gradually got closer to them. Seeing as their guard leader wanted to sit beside them, Valyr and the others quickly made space. "But I guess that's also a kind of learning experience. In any case, how does it feel to be a village guard now that you've gone through your first day?" asked Damien soon after. Finishing a piece of toast before starting to scarf down another, Valyr replied, "It feels nice, that's for sure. Glad to hear that." Hearing those words come out of Damien's mouth, Leon and the others began to grin in response as they continued to talk about some things while they ate their respective breakfasts. Eventually, everyone was done eating, prompting them to go their separate ways. But before they did, Damien gave Valyr a piece of advice. "Since you've overexerted yourself yesterday, take a rest for today. If you're feeling restless, you could train a bit in the training field, but that's all. A balance between work and rest is also important." After saying those words, Damien finally left the premises, with Valyr committing his words to memory. Looking around the cafeteria for a while, he eventually decided to take a stroll for today, thinking about buying a couple of clothes to change into aside from the uniforms he was given. Recalling the money pouch Trindal had given him before they parted ways, he quickly made a detour to his dormitory as a certain memory flashed in his mind. "Now that I think about it, I could have gotten a sizable chunk of money from selling those monster corpses," he thought, slightly regretting the fact that he had not considered doing so yesterday. Although he felt like the corpses were still there, considering how sparsely scattered the monsters in the area were, he decided that it was better for the ground to claim the corpses instead. After all, no one wanted to buy rotting corpses. Placing the money pouch into his pocket, Valyr leisurely made his way to the barracks entrance before leaving, strolling around the village as he thought about some of the things he wanted to do before the beta version began. First off, I need to get my hands on the basic blacksmith skills, he thought to himself, gazing far away at a building with a seemingly tall chimney. Speaking of which, I should probably make a trip to the village smithy later. I have to unlock the blacksmith technology tree if I want to make progress. Recalling what he knew about the requirements to obtain the blacksmith class, he knew that he would have to dip his hands into the technology tree, something he could not avoid in the long run. From the name of the feature alone, one could easily infer that the technology tree had something to do with a system that branched out like a tree, and one would be correct. However, the technology tree's purpose went far beyond that, with most players considering it to be the most important thing for a player to focus on aside from skills. The technology tree could be split up into 3 broad sections: combat, production, and innovation. Naturally, all of these sections had their own branches, with the combat section's branches being the various weapons, and the production section's branches being the various fields of production one could undertake, with blacksmithing being one of them. However, if one were to ask any player which section of the technology tree was of paramount importance, they would unanimously agree that the title would have to go to the innovation section. Now, one might wonder why that would be the case. Well, the answer to that would be simple. The innovation section gave access to more advanced technology. In a world like Veldener, which had a level of technology more or less equivalent to the Renaissance era, having access to a higher level of technology meant having access to a great source of power. Since Greater Beyond was a game that allowed players to traverse through multiple universes in its later versions, it went without saying that highly advanced technology was a requirement if one needed to get around the universe, aside from relying on one's own strength. With that in mind, Valyr was going to rely on the disparity between the technology currently available in Veldener and the level of technology he'll reach in the future to establish a mark on this world, utilizing the properties of the blacksmith class as much as possible. Pondering over it, he knew that something like this had been done before by a couple players in his previous life, utilizing a production class and the technology tree to establish a period of dominance in their respective worlds. Though, since no one had used the strategy before in this one, it could be said that Valyr was going to be the pioneer to make the strategy something to be feared. It went without saying that he was going to use it to leave a long-lasting image in the minds of players and NPCs alike, achieving the reputation necessary for his future organization to recruit people in droves. Aside from unlocking the technology tree and getting those skills, there are some other skills I need to get. At some point, Valyr sat on an open bench along the street, admiring the somewhat idyllic sight before him. I wonder if the contribution point shop has some of them? With that thought in mind, he went ahead and opened a screen in front of him, perusing through the contribution point shop skill section in search for the skills he needed. While doing so, he pondered over which class he was going to take as his rank 1 class. Although he had narrowed his choice down to a couple variant blacksmith classes yesterday while at the training field, it was only some time ago did he decide to settle on a single one, deciding to take a class that was far better than what a blacksmith could normally do, yet was not restricted compared to the other variants he had in mind. Of course, there were variant classes far stronger than the classes he had set his mind on getting. However, all of them had requirements far more stringent than the ones he chose, with a couple of them even needing the being to undergo multiple high-difficulty quests in a row to just obtain the qualifications to ascend to that class. In fact, there was even a class that needed one's stats to all be at 100, a number only achievable once one had a rank 2 class if one didn't use other means to do so. As mentioned before, he narrowed his choices down to a couple classes, taking into consideration of the beta version that was about to begin in about 2 months. As to how many classes exactly did he narrow it down to, it was actually 3. The first class was a blacksmith class that pursued the pinnacle of control when forging, which meant that one of the requirements was a high DX stat. As for the other class, it pursued the pinnacle of knowledge, relying on a blacksmith's ability to memorize and recall dozens, if not hundreds of blueprints. Naturally, such a class called for a high INT stat. Contemplating over these two choices, Valyr eventually discarded the two of them, considering that the third class was the best choice if he did not want to limit himself. Unlike the first two classes, which aimed for an extreme towards a certain stat, it instead aimed for a balance between the two previously mentioned stats, something Valyr preferred more. After all, the DX stat not only increased one's control while forging, it also increased one's control over one's weapon while fighting. As for the INT stat, other than allowing him to retain more information and the like, it also increased the size of one's mana pool, something he knew he would rely on in the long run. Nevertheless, one would think that the third class would be overshadowed by the first two classes, giving off the feeling that it was a jack of all trades, but a master of none. With that, the other requirements to obtain the class came in, allowing it to be classified as a variant class one tier higher than the two. "Oh, they actually have two of the skills I need," Valyr exclaimed in slight surprise, his attention focused on the skills currently on the screen. Though, this slight surprise was quickly replaced with a frown once he noticed the prerequisites that he had to fulfill before being able to buy them. "At the very least, I have this as a backup plan if all else fails." Deft Hands. Rarity. Common. Increases the user's DX for a limited amount of time in exchange for MP. Increasing the skill's level improves the efficacy and potency of the skill. Prerequisites. Guard rank. Cost. 500 contribution points. Robust Arms. Rarity. Common. Increases the user's STR for a limited amount of time in exchange for MP. Increasing the skill's level improves the efficacy and potency of the skill. Prerequisites. Guard rank. Cost. 500 contribution points. Considering that the guards I've seen so far all use weapons of some sort, it's no surprise that such skills are available the lowest rank, he muttered, clicking his tongue soon after. But to patrol for at least a month straight to get one of the two? I'd rather go with the first idea I have in mind. Though, I'll have to save that for when I get a bit stronger, he continued, scratching his head as he let out a light sigh. To surmount the gap brought about by focusing on a balance between the two stats, one of the requirements to obtain the variant class Valyr wanted to get was to obtain skills capable of temporarily enhancing a certain stat. In his case, he needed to obtain Deft Hands and Robust Arms, which enhanced DX and STR, and Astute Eyes and Astute Mind, which enhanced PR and INT. Although he was glad to find out that he could buy two of the skills he needed through the contribution point shop, with how much time it was going to take to accumulate the points to buy them, he would rather go with the first plan he had in mind, which was to head to a certain city and retrieve a quest there. That only leaves the final requirement for the class, which is to achieve a stat of 20 for both DX and INT, Valyr thought, slightly frowning as he rummaged through his memories, trying to recall methods that allowed him to achieve what he needed in the early game. With the civilian class giving 1 point to all stats and a free point for the person to allocate wherever they wanted by the time he had reached level 10, he would only be able to achieve 15 points for both DX and INT. If he allocated all 10 free points he would obtain evenly between the two stats. That meant that he had to find a way to obtain 5 more points for both stats. Fortunately, after a bit of thinking, his eyes slightly widened as a certain memory surfaced in his mind, eliciting a smile to appear on his face. Slapping his thighs as he let out a light chuckle, he muttered, "It's been so long since I used them that I almost forgot about him. Those damn reinforcement," as he recalled the reinforcement elixirs. A few other memories also surfaced into his mind, prompting another light chuckle to come out of Valyr's mouth as he found the memories hilarious. In his previous life, back when everyone was still trying to understand how the game worked, a few of the players relied on the power of money to obtain an item that allowed them to reach a level of power that was unachievable at the time. With this newfound power, they reigned as tyrants in their respective beginner areas, becoming both feared and despised by the players who had to toil away to reach the same level of power they got through whaling. Nevertheless, because of that, all players were introduced to the existence of reinforcement elixirs, items that, when consumed, gave a player an increase of 1 point to all stats. Although a player could only consume 10 of these reinforcement elixirs at most, doing so would mean that a player at level 1 would have the stats of a player exceeding level 10, allowing them to thrash any player below that level without much problem. Unfortunately for those people, their reign of terror was short-lived once people found out that there was actually a way to concoct reinforcement elixirs without having to resort to in-game purchases. Not only that, but they also found out that the reinforcement elixirs those who bought them got were of the lowest level, being termed as basic reinforcement elixirs. With this newfound knowledge being quickly spread throughout the player base, the playing field was quickly leveled as every new player from that point onward knew the importance of consuming the various levels of reinforcement elixirs. Since it would be a while since the knowledge of reinforcement elixirs would become widespread once more in this new life, Valyr was going to use it to his advantage to gain an edge, grinning as he started to browse through the contribution point shop's item tab. If I remember correctly, reinforcement elixirs are split into two categories: physical reinforcement elixirs and mental reinforcement elixirs, he thought, trying to recall the recipe for both. Although the bought ones give a boost to all stats, consuming both of them would still give the same effect. Plus, unlike the bought ones, they'll also give a little something extra once one consumes 10 of each. Thinking about the extra item that came along consuming 10 physical and 10 mental reinforcement elixirs, the grin on Valyr's face grew slightly wider, ecstatic to find out that the contribution point shop had the materials necessary to concoct the two elixir types: lizard dragon blood, mountain bull hoof, shadow serpent meat, and scarlet tiger claw. To think the shop would have every important material needed to concoct a batch of basic physical reinforcement elixir, he muttered inwardly. On top of that, they have erudite owl tongue, silver wolf eyes, and wise rabbit essence. Even the important materials for basic mental reinforcement elixir are available here. Checking the amount of contribution points needed to buy each one, Valyr eventually totaled all of them together, coming to a total of 140 contribution points. Seeing as he would only need to patrol for a week within the village rather than risk his life in the wilderness to obtain the necessary materials, he quickly thought that it was a good trade-off, considering that one batch of materials was enough for him to concoct 5 vials of each elixir. Coming to the conclusion that he would only have to patrol for 2 weeks straight to be able to consume both basic elixirs to the limit, Valyr closed the screen in front of him before standing up from the bench, continuing to stroll around the village for a bit more. After a few minutes of walking, he stopped in front of a building made out of incredibly sturdy material that looked similar to cut stone. Noticing the large chimney at the back of the building that stuck out like a sore thumb, Valyr took a quick glance at the sign hanging above the entrance, nodding that he had gone to the right place as he stepped inside. For a village smithy, it's quite well equipped, Valyr muttered to himself, taking in the sight in front of him that was ever so familiar. On the right side of the building was an L-shaped counter that had a selection of weapons hanging on its wall, while a couple wooden racks could be seen on the left side, all of them containing weapons that seemed to be of far greater quality than the ones in the barracks equipment room. At the very back of the building was a stone furnace, containing flames that radiated an immense amount of heat, giving off the feeling that it was going to burst out at any moment. Though, in front of the furnace was a man wearing a fireproof apron, hammering away at a piece of hot metal on the anvil before him. Hearing the sound of metal clashing against metal reverberating throughout the place, Valyr briefly closed his eyes as he allowed his mind to wander back to the memories of his early days as a blacksmith. Unfortunately for him, this trip was short-lived as the man in the smithy came up to him. "Welcome to the Eardo village smithy. What can I do for you?" As the calm tone of the man entered Valyr's ears, the latter was quickly jolted back to reality, coming face to face with a young man in his mid-20s that had a messy head of brown hair and a pair of hazelnut brown eyes. Though, quickly noticing the fireproof apron the man wore, the chiseled muscles underneath the man's thin gray shirt, and the calloused hands only obtained from incessant hours of menial labor, Valyr stopped himself from talking about the man's age as he nodded in response. I would like to learn the basics of blacksmithing, actually." "Is that so?" The man raised his eyebrow, slightly suspicious why a guard of their village would come to his smithy. Surely a guard like you would already be busy polishing their combat skills, no? Why submit yourself to grueling hours in front of a hot furnace on top of that? Although his question makes sense, that limitation doesn't really apply to me. Thinking about his response, Valyr eventually opened his mouth. That may be the case for other guards, but not me. Plus, what's wrong with a guard picking up blacksmithing? Why the need for a hostile tone? Hostile? Hearing Valor's last question, the man had a puzzled look for a bit. Shaking his head, he clarified, "If you thought my questions seemed hostile, then let me apologize. I was just curious why a guard would pick up blacksmithing, considering that they already have to spend most of their time polishing their combat skills. In any case, you're right. There's nothing wrong with a guard picking up blacksmithing. That there was my mistake," he continued, looking at Valor's eyes. After a while, he turned around before letting out a light sigh as he returned to the anvil. "Unfortunately, I can't teach you blacksmithing. You don't have the strength necessary for it yet." Although Valyr was initially disheartened by the fact he wouldn't be able to learn blacksmithing from the man, after hearing the reasoning behind it, a light grin appeared on his face as his eyes grew determined. Letting out a hint of laughter, he then asked the man, "What if I did reach the necessary strength for it? Would you teach me?" "Well, that depends," the man replied, his attention mostly focused on the anvil. "How long do you think would it take you to reach my requirements?" "What does 2 weeks sound?" As those words came out of Valor's mouth, the man immediately stopped what he was doing as he looked at Valyr. Though he felt like the guard before him was bluffing one way or another, the confident smile Valyr had on his face made the blacksmith think that it was worth a gamble. It's been getting boring in here, just hammering away on my own anyway." With that, a screen appeared in front of the blacksmith, tapping a few things on it not long after. Soon after, he looked at Valyr. "All right then. You have 2 weeks. Good luck." Ding. You have received a new quest, Tristan's Trial. Ding. Tristan's Trial, time-limited quest. Difficulty B. Although you haven't met the minimum qualifications, Tristan wants to learn the basics of blacksmithing. You've decided to mention that you would be able to achieve it within 2 weeks. Skeptical of your claims, he gives you this quest to see if you have the ability to back up your words. If you do end up succeeding, perhaps he might teach you more than what you bargained for. Quest requirements. Reach a STR stat of 7, 2/7. Reach a DX stat of 7, 2/7. Reach an AGI stat of 7, 2/7. Reach a PER stat of 7, 2/7. Quest rewards. Affinity plus 30 with Tristan. Reputation plus 50 within Eardo village. 1000 XP. Early access to the technology tree. Quest penalty. Affinity minus 20 with Tristan. Reputation minus 100 within Eardo village. Remaining time, 20 days. Note: completing the quest in less time increases the chance of obtaining a quest linked to the current quest. Well then, this definitely wasn't something I was expecting to get, Valyr thought to himself, pleasantly surprised that he had obtained a quest from what he had just done. Then again, with me making such a boastful claim, it's no surprise he wants to see if I have the ability to back up. But a B rank quest, huh? That's also rare. Is it possible that there's more to this blacksmith than I thought? He muttered inwardly, recalling that the rank of quest commonly given out to players reached C rank at most. With a grading system that went from E to S, Valyr quickly recalled that most quests at B rank had relations to a larger quest line, with the remaining 2 ranks above it, an S rank, having something to do that might upset the balance of a world at the very least. Naturally, he also noticed this on the quest he was given. Although the requirement for the continuation was somewhat gimmicky, needing him to complete the quest before time ran out, it only stimulated him to do better, curious as to what would come after. Aside from the decent chunk of XP I'd get from the quest, which is always nice, I'd also get an increase in my reputation, though it would only be effective around the village. Well, it's definitely better than nothing. Continuing to read through the quest description, Valor's eyes gravitated towards the rewards, only for it to focus on another portion of the screen not long after. Tristan, was it?" Valyr called out all of a sudden, prompting the man in the smithy to look back at him in response. "I said I'd be able to complete your requirements within 2 weeks. Why are you giving me another week to complete it? Hearing the question, Tristan rubbed his chin for a bit as he pondered over it. After a while, he raised a finger. Well, for one, why not? Consider it me being kind toward the guard who wants to pick up the art of blacksmithing. But on a serious note, although I want to believe your claim of being able to do it in 2 weeks, think of it as me just erring on the side of caution. After all, I don't want you to lose interest in blacksmithing just because of this, he continued. Also, I don't really want to be on the bad side of one of the village guards if I can afford to. I might be capable of fighting, but you guys are the ones specialized in that matter. In any case, no rush. Reaching level 7 is more difficult than one might think, after all. After saying those words, Tristan returned his gaze to the anvil in front of him, picking up the bar of metal on the surface with tongs before placing it into the roaring furnace near him. Feeling as if it would be useless to talk to the guy for longer, Valyr closed the screen in front of his face, scratching his head before turning around to leave the smithy. The quest requires me to reach 7 points on 4 stats, which would only be possible if I reach level 7, considering I don't know other ways to increase it. While making his way back to the barracks, Valyr pondered over the requirements of the quest he had gotten. Even Tristan mentioned earlier that I would need to reach level 7 if I want to complete the quest. Feeling a slight rumble in his stomach, Valyr slightly hastened his pace as a knowing smile appeared on his face. Well, if he knew that I had access to something like the basic reinforcement elixirs, he would have probably believed my claim. Then again, there's not much point revealing secrets to strangers for the sake of bragging. In any case, with Tristan giving me over 2 weeks to complete the quest, I could go ahead with my previous plan of participating in the night patrols for 2 weeks straight. Scratching his head, he pondered over how he was going to go about completing the quest. After that, I'll buy the materials from the contribution point shop and have an alchemist concoct the elixirs for me, which would have been the ideal plan for sure. But then I remembered alchemists that are capable of squeezing out every last drop from the materials could only be found in the cities. On top of that, obtaining the services of those alchemists would take far more money than I currently have. Realizing this, Valyr slightly frowned. Though if I settle for alchemists in the nearby towns and villages, or find the alchemist in this village, it's certain that they wouldn't be able to concoct a full batch of the elixirs. What should I? Just as he had arrived at the barracks entrance, a thought surfaced in his mind, prompting him to stop in his steps as the pain relief pills he had bought earlier flashed in his mind not long after. It seems I'll have to grin and bear through the pain for some time. I almost forgot to consider increasing my levels with XP. With that in mind, a plan was quickly drafted in Valyr's mind as he made his way to the cafeteria, giving him the feeling that he would not only be able to complete the requirements, but do so in less than half the amount of time he was given. New plan. I'm going to participate in the night patrols for a week straight to get 1 batch of the materials needed to concoct the 2 basic elixirs. While doing that, I'll head outside the village in the morning to get some XP from monsters to increase my level. I guess I'll accumulate enough XP to reach level 4 or 5. Something along those lines. In any case, I'll have to base that on the number of vials the alchemist is able to concoct from the materials I give them. If they make 3 vials or more, that would be great, but if they only make 2 vials, I guess it'll work out. For now, I'm gonna let my body get as much rest as possible. Crap, I forgot to buy. After making a slight detour to the nearby tailor shop to buy a decent amount of clothes he could change to once he was done eating, Valyr spent the remainder of his day recuperating, allowing his body to naturally heal from the soreness brought about by overexerting himself on the day. Though, that did not mean that he spent it idling around in his room. Around the afternoon, he made his way to the training field in one of his newly bought clothes, striking against one of the training dummies with his wooden spear in order to recall more of his combat experience. An hour later, he left the field, satisfied with what he had recalled, as well as the fact that he got his blood boiling. By the time night fell, he met up with Leon and the others in the cafeteria, conversing about various topics as they ate. At some point, Valyr brought up the topic of finding an alchemist, which quickly piqued the others' interest. So, do you guys know if we have an alchemist in this village? Valyr asked, looking at the others' expressions to see if they knew anything. Well, you could always try checking the village clinic, Louis said in response, putting a spoonful of the stew he ordered in his mouth. That's probably the best place to start looking for an alchemist. They do sell a lot of basic alchemical concoctions, so I'd say head to the clinic first as well, said Jonah soon after. There's also the off chance that all of those alchemical concoctions they sell come from one of their connections. If that's the case, try getting their information from the clinic. It might lead you to an alchemist, Leon said after he finished chewing on his food. Worst case scenario, just head to Concaw Town. Pretty sure you could hire an alchemist's services for a fee. In any case, why are you looking for an alchemist? Louis asked the young man at some point. You need a specific concoction made? Pretty much. Valyr nodded, prompting the others to look at him with interest, wondering if he would tell them what he exactly wanted to be concocted. Unfortunately for them, a light chuckle was the only response they got from him, which naturally elicited multiple frowns and tongue clicks from the others. Seeing their response, Valor's chuckle eventually turned into laughter. Although I really can't say anything about it for now. Just know that you'll be in for a surprise within the following week or two. With only those words to work off of, the others begrudgingly finished their dinners, giving Valyr a cold glare before they left. In response to those glares, he could only wryly smile. Well, if they knew what I wanted to get concocted, they'd probably lose their minds. It's better if I keep it to myself for now. Waking up from a good night's sleep, Valyr felt that his body had been reborn, with the soreness from 2 days ago completely gone, as if it wasn't there in the first place. Feeling revitalized, he went ahead and washed up his face before taking a quick shower, changing into a set of loose-fitting clothes once he had gotten out. Affixing his trusty wooden spear to his back, he grabbed a quick breakfast from the cafeteria before making his way to the barracks entrance sometime later. However, rather than stay around the entrance, giving off the feeling that he was waiting for the other guards to start their patrol, he instead walked past it, making his way to the village outskirts to find some monsters to kill. Indeed, his plan was now in motion. Now that he was level 2, that meant that the ideal targets for him had changed from level 1 monsters to level 2 ones. However, curious as to how vast the difference and increase of a single point on all stat was, he decided to start off the day with a level 1 monster, quickly finding one after searching around the periphery of the village around 10 minutes later. Ding! You have slain a level 1 boar. You have gained 10 XP. Huh. Didn't think the XP reduction system would apply this early on, muttered Valyr as he recalled the fight that had transpired earlier. Though, it would be more accurate to call it a one-sided beating, given how he had not given the boar he fought even a single opportunity to retaliate. Anyways, let's move on to some actual opponents. With that, Valyr searched for monsters around the same level, eventually killing 20 of them by the time the sun had reached its zenith. Feeling his stomach rumble in hunger, Valyr went ahead and grabbed 2 of the monster corpses, lifting both on each shoulder as he returned to the village. This makes for some good endurance training. After some time, he had arrived in front of the tailor shop he bought his clothes from, plopping down the monster corpses on the ground as he asked the tailor if he wanted to buy the hide from the monsters he brought. Leaving with skinned corpses and a decent amount of coins, he then made his way to the village inn, where he sold the corpses for them to use as meat for their meals. Getting yet another decent chunk of money out of the exchange, Valyr then left the inn, making his way back to the barracks as he summed up everything that had transpired so far. So, each level 2 monster gives me 20 XP per kill. I killed 20 monsters earlier, so that means I have 400 and some XP I could use. I'll use some of it to increase my level to level 3, which will allow me to start fighting against level 3 monsters, thereby increasing the amount of XP I get. Aside from that, hauling along those 2 corpses back gave me a total of 100 copper coins, which is equivalent to 1 silver coin. Considering that I spent half of what Trindall gave me on clothes yesterday, I currently have 1.5 silver coins to my name. Chuckling at how poor he was, Valyr was satisfied with the routine he had going on, deciding to stick to it as he made his way to the cafeteria to get some lunch, only to head to the training field around an hour later. Once night fell, he participated in the night patrol, coordinating with the other guards to make sure the people of the village got back to their homes respectively. And with that, Valyr kept up the routine the following day, heading outside the village to kill a bunch of monsters before hauling a couple back to the village to sell. After that, he would spend his time in the barracks, either talking with the other guards or training in the training field, only to change into his guard uniform once it was time for him to begin his night patrol. Unexpectedly, a week had passed in this. Feeling the sun's rays peer through his window for the umpteenth time, Valyr let out a long exhale, stifling a yawn as he slowly got out of bed. Going through his usual routine, he left his room to head to the cafeteria sometime later in a set of clean-looking clothes. By the time he had arrived, he quickly noticed a few familiar people sitting on a certain table, prompting him to quickly grab his breakfast and make his way there. "Morning," Valyr said to these people, receiving light waves, nods, and yawns in response. Sitting down, he took a cursory glance at the bowl of soup he got, putting a spoonful of it into his mouth before inwardly nodding in satisfaction. "Ah, good soup." "Morning, Valyr," Leon replied, his hair still somewhat messy. "Us here were just talking that it's been over a week since you become a village guard. Damien also told us you enlisted as a village guard the first day you came to the village, so there's also that. Anyways, how have you been enjoying your stay in the village so far?" "It's been pretty good, I guess," answered Valyr with a shrug of his shoulders. "I don't really have anything else to compare it to, but having access to free food is definitely nice." "Call it a perk of being a village guard," said Louis with a light smile on his face. "In any case, didn't you tell us you were going to head to the village clinic today?" Hearing those words, the others' ears perked up, their eyes gaining a bit of vigor as they listened in on the conversation. As for Valyr, he lightly nodded in response to those words after pondering over it for a bit. "Yeah, I think I did say something like that." "So, are you going to tell us?" Louis asked soon after, eliciting nods of agreement from the others listening in. Tell you what, although Valyr knew what they wanted to know, he acted oblivious, continuing to put spoonfuls of hot soup into his mouth. "I don't think I have anything to tell you." "Don't play dumb," said Leon in response, pointing his spoon at Valyr. "You asked us a week ago if we knew any alchemists in the village." "Sure, you mentioned to us that you'll attempt to meet up with an alchemist today a couple of days ago, but you still haven't told us what you wanted that alchemist to concoct. After all, that's the reason why you're meeting up with one, right?" "Yep." Valyr nodded in response, slurping up the remaining contents in the bowl before returning his tray. Returning to where the others were, he scratched his head as he pondered over it for a bit, deciding to reveal a bit more than what he revealed before. "Well, let's just say the village will go into a frenzy if word got out." Still vague as always. Hearing Valyr's response, everyone could not help but sigh in slight annoyance. For some, their imaginations ran amok as they tried to form a conclusion with the vague information Valyr was giving them. "Since you're being so secretive, are you asking an alchemist to help you concoct poison?" Being one of those who allowed their imaginations to let loose, Jonas decided to ask Valyr, eliciting wide-eyed stares from the others as they looked at Valyr in slight shock. "Do you want me to?" said Valyr in response, receiving wry chuckles not long after. "In any case, no. I'm not concocting poison." Standing up from his seat, Valyr soon bade farewell to the others, only to stop in his tracks after taking a few steps. Scratching his head in slight fury, he looked back at the others, deciding to satiate their curiosity once and for all. "Act fine. I'll tell you guys what I had the alchemist concoct once I'm back." With the others loudly cheering in excitement from those words, which quickly earned the ire of the others in the cafeteria, Valyr finally made his way back to his room, sitting down on his bed as he opened up his status screen. Ding! As a small screen appeared in front of his field of vision, it was only then did Valyr realize that a lot had actually changed for him during the past week. Valyr Zeihardt. Class: Civilian, Rank 0. Species: Human. Level 5. Power level: 42C. Unused XP: 2,369. HP: 50 of 50. MP: 50 of 50. Stats: 5 VIT, 5 STR, 5 AGI, 5 DX, 5 INT, 5 WS, 5 PR, 5 LUK, 5 unassigned points. Remarks: far stronger than the average person for sure, but nothing still stands out. Huh, To think I've actually leveled up this much during the past week, Valyr muttered. I guess it is possible to reach level 7 within the time Tristan gave me. During the past week, Valyr had come to the decision to kill 20 monsters a day, bringing 2 back to the village for selling. Because of this, he had amassed a great amount of XP, allowing him to reach level 5, while having enough stored to increase his level to level 6 if need be. Should I raise my level to 6? He pondered. I mean, I could, but that kind of defeats the purpose of the routine I've been doing for the past week. Speaking of which, I should grab the stuff I need from the shop, lest I forget. With that in mind, Valyr closed his status screen, opening up the contribution point shop on another screen soon after. With great haste, he scrolled through the shop's item tab, buying all of the materials he needed for the elixirs as his contribution points quickly returned to how it was on his second day. Whoosh! In an instant, a few eye-catching items manifested out of thin air, landing on Valor's palm as he placed each one on the floor. After that, he stood up from his bed and grabbed a bag he had bought a couple of days ago, placing all of the items that had manifested inside it. Thankfully, I had the hindsight to actually bring back some corpses to the village for selling. If not, I would probably be contemplating how I was going to bring all of this with me. Although the 2 corpses he had brought back to the village only gave him a silver coin, the corpses he brought back on the days after that were of a higher level, reflecting his level at that moment. With that, the quality of the hide and meat from the corpses were better, allowing him to get more money from every transaction. Because of that, he now had close to 10 silver coins to his name, though it would have been over 10, if not for a couple of it going toward the bag he had bought. Nevertheless, he thought it was a worthwhile purchase. Affixing the wooden spear on his back while slinging the bag over his right shoulder, Valyr looked around his room to make sure that he did not forget anything. After double-checking that everything important was on him, he then left the dormitory to make his way to the village clinic. While doing so, he finally came to a decision over a certain question he had. Well, better to be safe than sorry, I guess. Ding! 2068 XP has been allocated. You are now level 6. All of your stats have been increased by 1 point. You have gained 1. Feeling a wave of energy wash over his body from the level up, Valor's pace slightly hastened, making use of the energy to head towards the village clinic faster. With him asking Leon and the others as to where it was, even going so far as to have them walk him to it, it did not take long for him to arrive in front of a modest-looking building. Although the exterior of the building was made out of wood, Valyr felt that there was a hint of mana imbued into it, which made it give off the feeling that it had rooted itself into the ground. Stepping inside the building, he was greeted by the sight of a minimalistic yet clean exterior, with multiple wooden benches neatly arranged in one corner, while multiple shelves containing vials of liquid and other various trinkets could be seen on the other. In one corner were 2 stools, with a young boy sitting on one of them. Extending out his right arm, he showed a light wound to the young woman in front of him. The young woman, who sat on the other stool, said a few reassuring words to the boy in response before placing her hands above the wound. Soon after, a soothing green light emanated from the person's hands, allowing the young boy to watch in amazement as the light wound on his arm closed up within minutes. Stepping down from the stool, the young boy looked at his right arm before moving it around, a smile soon adorning his face as he thanked the young woman. Giving her a small pouch of money, the young boy quickly left the building as he bade farewell. In response, the young woman waved back at the young boy, bidding farewell to the latter, only to notice that there was another person in the building. "I apologize for not noticing you earlier," said the young woman in a slightly apologetic tone. After that, the person gave a light bow before asking, "How may I help you today? This is the village clinic, right?" Rather than answering the question, Valyr instead asked a question of his own. "Yes, this is indeed the village clinic," she replied, a light yet cheerful smile adorning her face. "Do you have an ailment of some sort? Perhaps a wound you would like to have treated?" Hearing the question, Valyr shook his head. "I actually came here because people said an alchemist could be found here." "Is Sir in need of an alchemist service?" asked the young woman in response to his explanation. "Indeed, I do. I actually need something to be concocted." Valyr nodded. So, does the clinic have an alchemist? We do. The young woman let out a light chuckle as she nodded. In fact, you're looking at them right now. In response to those words, Valyr raised his eyebrow in slight interest, taking a better look at the woman in front of him. With her burgundy hair tied up into a bun, being held in place by a thick stick of graphite, round silver-framed spectacles adorned her face, complementing her sky-blue irises. As she wore a light gray robe that covered her petite figure, it wouldn't be surprising for one to think that the woman looked more like a scholar than an alchemist. My name's Vera Askell. I'm a novice alchemist, as well as the doctor manning this clinic, she said soon after, introducing herself to Valyr. Not long after, she asked in a cheerful tone, "How about you, sir? May I know who you are?" Valyr Zeihardt, one of the village guards. Nodding, Valyr went ahead and introduced himself, prompting Vera's eyes to slightly widen in surprise before giving a respectful bow. "Thank you for protecting the village," said Vera, making him scratch his head in slight embarrassment from the sudden gratitude. "Anyways, Sir Valyr, what do you need have to concoct it exactly? Some medicine? A potion of some sort?" Before I answer your question, can we move to some place more private?" replied Valyr, prompting a light frown to appear on the woman's face. "I know it sounds selfish, but believe me when I say I don't want others knowing of this." Pondering over the question, a thought eventually surfaced on Vera's mind as she led him to a more secluded portion of the clinic. Casting a crude barrier made out of mana around them, a slight frown appeared on her face as she asked, "Would this be enough?" "This would be enough, yes." "Thank you." Valyr thanked her before removing the bag slung over his right shoulder, dropping it on the floor. He then spoke in a slightly hushed tone. "Well, to answer your earlier question, I need you concoct 2 types of elixirs for me." "Have you heard of reinforcement elixirs before?" he asked soon after, which made Vera look at him with widened eyes. "Guessing by your reaction, it seems you have." Nodding, she replied, "Although I haven't really tried concocting one before, I've heard my mentor mention it in passing." If I can remember her words correctly, reinforcement elixirs are capable of giving an increase to one's stats. "That's the one." Valyr nodded in response. Giving the bag to Vera, he then told her, "And here are the important materials you need to concoct a batch of basic physical and basic mental reinforcement elixir. Do you think you can concoct them?" Hearing Valyr's words, a look of great incredulity appeared on Vera's face. Giving the bag back to Valyr, she then asked, "But why me, sir? I'm just a novice alchemist. Wouldn't it be better for you to head to the nearest town and have a true alchemist concocted instead?" "Well, that's definitely an option, but unfortunately, I can't afford to do that." Valyr shook his head, wryly smiling as he thought about the remaining time on his quest. "Besides, I consider this to be my own gesture of giving back to the village after it has been so accommodating to me." In any case, with a knowing grin, he asked her, "Although you're giving it back on the surface, you actually want to try your hand at concocting it, right?" "Yes," Vera subconsciously blurted out, only to realize what she had said as she scratched her head. "I mean, yes, I do want to try concocting it, but these precious materials would be wasted on me if I used them. After all, I'm just a novice alchemist. I don't even know the recipe to the elixirs. It would truly be better for you to find an actual alchemist to concoct it instead." Normally, at this point, one would heed Vera's advice and head off to the nearest town to get it concocted. However, for some reason, Valyr had a feeling that it would be better to have Vera do it. Although he didn't know exactly why he got that feeling, he decided to trust his gut. "I don't really mind if you waste the materials. As long as you successfully concoct at least 1 vial of each, that's enough for me. I just have to patrol for another week to get another batch of the same materials anyway." Seeing as his words were having the opposite effect on her, Valyr scratched the back of his head as he awkwardly smiled. "Seriously, it's no problem. How about this? Think of it as me wanting to help you improve in the path of alchemy. Is that helping?" "No, not really," Vera murmured in response, glancing once more at the bag of items given to her, even though she was ecstatic to try concocting something that was somewhat above her skill level. Vera still had no clue why a person like Valyr decided to put their trust into a novice alchemist like her. "Is there something about me that stands out?" Is this a confession of some sort? Or am I just making it all up, and he actually just wants to concoct the elixir? Vera asked herself after that, her imagination running wild as she looked at Valyr. Eventually, their gazes locked onto each other, dispelling all of the random thoughts swirling in Vera's mind. Soon, a determined expression could be seen on her face as an air of professionalism soon emanated from her. All right, I'll concoct the elixirs for you. But as I'm a novice alchemist, remember that there's a high chance I might waste your materials, she added, her tone calm. If you want to grab the bag and have another alchemist concoct it for you, you still have the chance to do so. There's no need. Valyr smiled in response. You do it. Oh, for heaven's sake. Muttering out these words, Vera let out a long sigh as she gazed at her slightly trembling hands. Taking a couple more deep breaths to calm her nerves, she then asked Valyr to follow her as they headed to the back of the clinic.